Welcome to the empty boat. You have arrived, maybe not at a place, but at a moment, a quiet moment, just for you. A pause between the noise of thoughts and the silence beneath them. Here we drift together, not to chase answers, but to let them come when the waters are still. Not to fix the storm, but to sit with it, like an old friend we no longer fear. The empty boat is not just a name, it is a way of being, a way of returning to what is already here. This breath, this stillness, this truth. You do not need to try, you do not need to understand everything. You are allowed to just listen. We will journey through 25 stories, each one a lantern, a ripple, a whisper from Zen masters, forest monks, wandering hearts. Each story carries not just a teaching, but a memory of who you are when you stop striving. So let go of the day, let go of the future. Come sit with me in the boat that floats by, not rowing, empty, yet deeply full. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Story 1. The Teacup and the Storm. It was late autumn in the hills of Guyane. The air had turned crisp, and the maple trees had begun shedding their crimson leaves in gentle spirals that danced on the wind. Lanterns glowed softly through the mist, and the distant sound of a bamboo water fountain echoed like a heartbeat through the forest. At the edge of a mountain path stood a small wooden temple, worn by time but held together by silence. Inside, Master Riku, an aging monk known for his quiet wisdom, was sweeping the stone steps. His movements were slow, not from age, but from attention. Every breath matched the arc of the broom, every sweep an act of presence. That evening, a stranger arrived. Her steps hurried, her breath uneven, her face drawn tight with invisible burdens. She bowed quickly, almost perfunctorily, and entered without waiting for invitation. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." Master Riku looked up. He studied her face not with scrutiny but with stillness. "Sit," he said, motioning toward the tatami mat near the hearth. She sat, but her body did not settle. Her fingers twisted in her lap. Her eyes darted across the room. Even in silence, she could not stop speaking to herself. "I've lost my job. My partner left. My friends don't understand me. I've done everything right in paper, but nothing feels right in my heart. My mind won't stop. It's like a storm inside a teacup. Small, maybe, but violent, and I'm drowning in it." Master Riku did not respond. Instead, he rose and fetched a Castian kettle from the fire. Slowly, he began to pour tea into her cup. He poured until it filled, then kept pouring. Hot tea spilled over the edge, onto the tray, and began to drip onto her hands. "Stop," she cried, pulling back. "It's already full." The old monk set the kettle down. "Exactly," he said. "You came here with a cup already full. There is no room for anything else." She stared at him, blinking. The silence that followed stretched but did not strain. For the first time, she breathed without speaking. That night, she stayed in the temple. She awoke before dawn to the scent of incense and the distant sound of wind through trees. Master Riku was sitting outside, watching the sky shift from deep indigo to silver. He handed her a broom without explanation. "Clean," he said, "not because the temple needs it. Clean because your mind does." She did as he asked. At first her sweeping was impatient, quick strokes, distracted movements, but something about the rhythm began to change her. With each sweep, her breath slowed. Her thoughts lost their urgency. She began to hear the whisper of the straw against stone. She began to feel the ground beneath her. By midday, she sat on the temple steps beside him. They watched a single drop of rain tremble at the edge of a leaf. It clung there, resisting gravity. That drop, he said softly, thinks it will die when it lets go, but it doesn't know the stream is waiting. She looked at him, and her eyes welled up. I don't know how to let go, she whispered. Everything I've held onto, my job, my relationship, my plans that defined me. If I release all of that, what's left? He was quiet for a long moment. Space, he said. Enough space for something real to enter. She spent 3 days at the temple. They spoke little. She cleaned, she walked, she sat. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she smiled without reason. She did not find answers, but she began to hear her own questions more clearly. Before leaving, she bowed deeply. I'm still scared, she admitted. That's fine, Master Riku said. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to stand still in the storm and watch the teacup without spilling it further. She smiled faintly, as if something inside her had exhaled for the first time in months. And then she left. She did not walk faster. She did not walk slower. She simply walked. A week later, the leaves had mostly fallen. The forest floor was a carpet of gold and red. Master Riku poured himself a cup of tea. This time, he stopped just before it reached the brim. Long ago, a scholar came to visit Master Nonin, asking to understand Zen. Nonin served him tea. As the scholar watched, Nonin poured and poured until the tea overflowed. It is full, the scholar cried. Nonin replied, like this cup, your mind is full of your own opinions and preconceptions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? The teacup becomes a symbol not of emptiness as loss, but emptiness as potential. When we are full, fears, assumptions, judgments, there is no room for wisdom to enter. Zen teaches that only when we let go of what we think we know can we begin to see what truly is. In Buddhism, this is called Shoshin, or beginner's mind, a mind that is open, curious, not burdened by knowledge or expectation. The Buddha once said, with a mind free from craving, a heart free from fear, one lives at peace. This is not philosophy, it is a path. A practice, in psychological terms, what the woman experienced is known as cognitive overload. In our modern world, we are taught to fill every moment, respond to every email, fix every flaw, achieve every goal. But this constant input becomes internal noise. Anxiety is often not the cause, but the symptom of a mind that has no space to breathe. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means allowing. It means making space for stillness to speak. Sometimes the most radical act is to stop doing, to stop trying, to simply be. So tonight, ask yourself gently, what fills your cup? What story are you replaying again and again? What if you could set it down just for one breath? Close your eyes. Imagine holding a small ceramic cup. Feel its warmth, its weight. Now imagine slowly tipping it over, not in violence, but in release. Let the contents spill your worries, your plans, your self-definitions. Let them pour now. Feel the emptiness that remains, not hollow, but spacious, not lacking, but ready. The storm will come and go, but the cup is always yours, too empty, and in its emptiness, peace waits. Let us continue. Story 2. The bell that rings without sound there was once a temple nestled high above the mist line, in the folds of a mountain that touched the sky. It had no name carved into stone, no banners at the gate. Those who found it did not arrive by accident, but neither did they know they had been seeking it. In that temple lived an old monk named Shun. He was known not for sermons or ceremonies, but for his silence. Travelers came with questions, burdens, or just the echo of a longing they could not name. And in return, Shun offered no advice, no explanation, no scripture-only presence. One winter, a young man named Daichi arrived. He had walked for 3 days through snow and frostbite, drawn by a rumor whispered from village to village that the monk on the mountain had a bell that rang without sound. It was said that if you heard the bell, your suffering would dissolve, your confusion would lift, and you would know peace. When Daichi arrived, exhausted and trembling, he bowed low and asked directly, "Master Shun, is it true? Do you have a bell that rings without sound?" Shun only nodded and pointed to the bell tower. The tower was plain made of cedar and rope, with no bell inside. Daichi looked up, confused. "But it's empty." Shun said nothing. He simply sat and closed. His eyes. Days passed. Daichi stayed. Each morning he climbed the tower, staring at the hollow frame, listening for something, anything. The wind passed through. The snow fell. His ears strained until they ached, but there was no sound. On the 4th day, Daichi grew angry. "You mock me," he shouted. "There is no bell, no sound, no teaching. I wasted my time." Shun remained still, but this time he opened his eyes. "Sit," he said quietly, "and don't listen with your ears." Daichi frowned. "Then how?" Shun touched his own chest. "With this," he said, with silence. That night, Daichi could not sleep. The wind outside howled like a creature in pain, and yet within the temple it was utterly still. He sat in the meditation hall, eyes closed, the monk's words turning in his mind. Don't listen with your ears. So he listened differently. He listened to the sound beneath the wind, beneath his thoughts, beneath his own questions. He listened to the ache in his shoulders, the flutter of his heartbeat, the hush of his breath, and suddenly he heard it, a resonance not made of air or vibration, but of stillness. It rang not in his ears, but in his being. It was a bell with no sound, and yet it rang through everything, his memories, his grief, his plans, his name. It stripped them bare until all that remained was awareness itself. He wept, not because he was sad, but because for the first time he was not lost. The next morning he went to Shun and bowed deeply. "I heard it," he said. Shun nodded once. "Then you understand?" Daichi asked, "What should I do now?" The monk answered, "Return and live from that silence." So he did. He left without ceremony. He went back to the world not as a man with answers, but as a man who could hear again. There is a Zen saying, "The sound of the bell is not in the bell. It is in the one who listens." This story is not about a literal bell, nor a magical monk. It is about how silence speaks, how truth does not need volume, and how the deepest realizations are not taught, they are uncovered. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." But sometimes, even a word is too much. Sometimes, peace is what arrives when words are absent. In meditation, we practice this. We return to the breath, not because the breath is interesting, but because it leads us away from distraction, back into presence. The bell that rings without sound is simply this: the moment we stop grasping and simply notice. In psychological terms, this story speaks to what modern therapists call inner stillness or interoception, the ability to sense the body's internal signals, to become aware of tension, breath, emotion without reacting. In a noisy world, people often search for louder and louder answers, but the answers we seek are not outside. They are buried under layers of noise, inner chatter, societal pressure, self-judgment. Silence can feel frightening at first. Many avoid it, but beneath the silence, something beautiful stirs. The voice of the self that does not shout, the truth that doesn't demand attention, the inner knowing that has always been there. It is the bell, and it rings every time we are truly present. So, tonight, wherever you are, sit quietly for a moment. Close your eyes. Don't try to empty your mind. Don't force anything. Just listen. Not with your ears, but with your presence. Feel your breath, your heartbeat, the weight of your body on the chair or bed. Can you sense the stillness beneath the movement? Can you hear the bell? Not a sound, but an opening, not a teaching, but a remembrance. Let it ring. You do not need to understand everything. You only need to return to the temple that lives within your breath, to the bell that does not need to be struck, because it is already sounding. And when the world gets loud again, as it always does, know this: silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of everything, and it is always waiting just beneath the noise. Shall we continue? The next story is already unfolding in the wind. Story 3. The monk who planted clouds long ago, in a valley untouched by roads, where fog lingered like memory and birds sang like they remembered the beginning of the world. There lived a monk named Ginan. His temple was barely more than a wooden hut surrounded by moss, nestled among stones polished by time and streams that hummed lullabies to the trees. Ginan was not famous. He wrote no texts, led no ceremonies. Yet villagers from miles away would trek to see him, not because he gave them what they wanted, but because, somehow, just being near him made them feel less burdened, as though something had been lifted without a word. He spent his days tending to the earth, touching it with care as if it had a soul of its own. He had no fields, no crops to harvest, only empty plots, bare earth, and scattered stones. Yet each morning he would go out and dig, rake, water, and wait. People asked him, often with confusion, "What are you planting, Master Ginan?" And he would smile softly and answer, "Clouds." They laughed, not cruelly, but kindly, as one does when hearing the nonsense of a gentle man. Clouds cannot be planted, they thought. They simply come and go, untethered to soil or seed. But Ginan kept working. He would press his fingers into the earth, lift them to the sky, and whisper things no one could hear. He waited, he watched. For years he did this. Then one summer, a young woman named Kayo came to the temple. She was thin with grief, eyes clouded by the recent loss of her mother. She carried her sorrow like a stone in her chest. It made her chest tight, her breath shallow, and her world colorless. She bowed before Ginan, knelt in the garden, and asked, "Can you help me forget her?" The monk looked up from the soil. "No," he said, "but I can help you remember differently." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He placed a wooden spade in her hand. "Help me plant clouds." So she did. Day after day, they dug, they watered, they arranged stones. There was no fruit, no flower, no sign of what they were creating. Yet something began to shift. At first, she resisted. Her mind clung to memories both sweet and agonizing. But the rhythm of the work, the breath, The movement, the silence began to unravel the knot in her chest. One morning, she asked, "Why clouds?" Jinan paused and pointed to the sky. "They come without clinging. They go without grief. They are always moving, always changing. But they are never truly lost. Even when they disappear, they return this in a different form." She looked up. The sky was vast, open, blue. But in the distance, a single cloud drifted, slow and soft. "Like love," she whispered, "like loss." He added, "That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Kaio sat beside the stream, tears running freely not from pain, but from something deeper, a release, a recognition, a thank you. She stayed for 30 days. She left without needing to ask more. She carried nothing. But her heart was lighter than it had been in years. Years passed. The villagers still came. They still asked what the monk was planting. He still answered, "Clouds." And on certain mornings, when mist curled around the stones, and the light made the earth shimmer as if the heavens had descended, people began to believe, not in magic, not in miracles, but in the quiet transformation of tending to what cannot be held. And when the monk finally passed at peace, in silence, beneath the very cloud he once watched with chaos, the garden remained, still bare, still unbloomed. Yet pilgrims came not to see flowers, but to sit, to breathe, to remember, to grieve without drowning, to love without holding too tightly, to let go. Just like clouds, there is an old Zen saying, "Let your thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Do not cling to them, do not chase them." In this story, the monk does not teach by word, but by rhythm. He does not offer wisdom to be memorized, but presence to be felt. Clouds, in Buddhism, often symbolize essential truth that everything changes. Pain changes, joy changes. Our identities, our relationships, our losses, they arise, they pass. And yet we suffer not because they change, but because we resist their changing. The Buddha taught, whatever is subject to origination is also subject to cessation. Understanding this, not with the mind, but with the heart, is the key to liberation. Modern psychology speaks of grief not as something to overcome, but something to integrate. We do not forget those we lose. We remember them in new ways. We build new relationships with their absence. We learn to carry the pain differently. Planting clouds is an act of mindful grief. It is working with what cannot be fixed. It is the practice of holding space for transformation without rushing it. It is the wisdom of tending to the invisible, knowing that not all growth can be seen. Grief is not a wound to be closed. It is a doorway through which love continues to walk softly, silently, like a cloud across the morning sky. So now, dear listener, I invite you to sit with your own garden. What are you planting, even if no one else can see? What cloud is moving through you today, of memory, of longing, of hope? Close your eyes. Picture a plot of earth in your heart. Do not ask it to bloom. Do not rush its growth. Simply tend to it with breath, with stillness, with love. Let the past come. Let it pass. Let the sorrow rise. Let it soften. Let the clouds move through you, not against you. There is nothing wrong with remembering, but there is freedom in remembering without clinging, and in time you will find what once felt like a storm now passes like a cloud. Shall we continue? The next story waits at the edge of the forest, where stillness meets wind, and another truth is ready to unfold. Story 4. Beneath the banyan tree, The banyan tree stood alone at the edge of a forgotten village, its roots like old fingers pressing into the earth, its branches wide enough to hold the sky. It had been there long before the houses, before the road, before the silence of time laid its hush across the land. People said it could remember, that if you sat long enough beneath its leaves, something inside you would remember too. Every morning, before the sun reached the tops of the rice paddies, the boy came to sit beneath it. His name was Haru, and he was 12 when his mother left without goodbye. One morning she had been there, brushing his hair gently, humming as she folded his clothes, and the next there was only her absence, hanging in the air like incense. Smoke after a prayer. His father didn't talk about it. He worked harder in the fields, came home with soil on his hands and bitterness in his voice. When Haru asked where she went, his father's face would harden. She was weak. He'd say she left us, that's all. But Haru didn't feel anger. Not then. He felt confusion, like a story missing its ending. He carried that unfinished story to the banyan tree every day. He didn't pray, he didn't speak. He just sat, hoping the wind through the leaves might whisper something he didn't yet understand. One day, as summer thickened and the air held the weight of things unsaid, a traveling monk appeared. His robes were faded, his sandals worn smooth, and he carried no bag. He walked as if the world carried him rather than the other way around. He saw Haru beneath the tree and smiled gently. "Is this your temple?" he asked. Haru shook his head. "It's just a tree." The monk sat beside him. "I see. And what do you do here every morning?" Haru hesitated. "I wait. For what? I don't know," the boy said. "Maybe for her to come back, or for the tree to tell me why she left." The monk looked up at the canopy where the light filtered like gold through the leaves. "Trees don't give answers," he said, "but they can give us the space to hear our own." They sat in silence for a long time. Then the monk asked, "Do you love her?" "Yes," Haru said quickly, before he could stop himself. Even now. "And your father?" Haru looked away. "I don't know," the monk nodded. "Then it is time to sit with both." He reached into his sleeve and pulled out 2 pebbles, one white, one black. "Place one in each hand," he said. "Feel them. Don't think. Just hold them." Haru did as he was told. The stones were warm from the monk's body. One smooth, the other slightly rough. "Your love for her is still here," the monk said. "It hasn't gone anywhere, but your anger toward your father is beginning to cover it, like weeds over a garden." "I don't want to hate him," Haru whispered, "but he doesn't see me. He only sees her absence. And what do you see?" The boy looked at his hands. "I see both. I feel both." "Good," said the monk. "Now let the stones fall." Haru opened his palms. The stones dropped onto the soil. The banyan tree did not move, but the leaves rustled as if stirred by something deeper than wind. "That is the practice," said the monk. "To hold, to feel, and then to let go." "But it still hurts," Haru said. "Of course," the monk replied. "Letting go is not the same as forgetting. The pain is part of the love, and the love is still yours." That evening, the monk stayed beneath the tree. He did not ask for food or shelter. When morning came, Haru returned, but the monk was gone. In his place, the 2 stones had been placed neatly on the bench where they had sat. He picked them up, closed his eyes, and for the first time he cried, not out of confusion, not out of anger, but out of the full, aching presence of love that had nowhere to go, and yet still remained. Years later, Haru grew tall. His father grew quieter. One spring, when the old man became ill, Haru sat beside his bed and read to him. They never spoke of her, but they shared the silence between the words. And sometimes that was enough. The banyan tree still stood at the edge of the village. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, it sounded like it was humming. Not a lullaby, not a hymn, just a reminder that some questions do not need answers. Some losses are not meant to be healed, and some love, like roots, grows strongest in the dark, beneath the banyan tree. In Zen, there is a practice of sitting with what is not, fixing, not analyzing, not pushing away, just holding. This is called Shekintaza, just sitting. Not to achieve anything, but to be fully present with whatever arises. The Buddha once said, "You, yourself, as much as anyone in the universe, deserve your love and compassion, and this includes your younger self, the child within who still waits beneath the banyan tree for someone who never returned." Forgiveness is not always a dramatic gesture. Sometimes it is a quiet act of saying, "I see you, I feel you, and I will not abandon you, even if they did." In psychological healing, we speak of ambiguous loss, the kind of grief where there is no clear resolution. A parent who leaves, a relationship that fades without closure. It is a wound that does not scar cleanly, and yet we can still make peace with what remains. We can learn to live with both stones in our hands, the love and the anger, and choose gently when to let them fall. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a process to be honored. Love does not vanish with absence. It simply changes form. So tonight, find your banyan tree. It may be a quiet place in your mind, a memory, a bench beneath stars. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what am I still holding? What am I afraid to feel? Can I hold both stones? And when I'm ready, can I let them rest? The leaves above you rustle. They do not give you answers, but they give you space, and in that space, you may finally hear your own heart. Let us continue. The next story is already taking root. Story 5. The wind through the bamboo in the southern province. Where the bamboo grows tall and close like quiet brothers, there is a path that few travelers take. It winds not because it must, but because the land prefers it so. If one follows it with patience, past the rice paddies and the soft murmur of the river, they may come upon a modest hermitage built of dark wood and woven reeds, hidden just beyond. Where the bamboo sways, there lived a monk there, named Ryu. He was not old, nor particularly young. He had no disciples, no titles, no robes of distinction. But his presence was like still water, unassuming, clear, deep. Those who wandered into his presence found something disarming. He did not react, not to praise, not to insult, not to urgency or despair. If you shouted, he listened. If you wept, he listened. If you asked for advice, he would pour tea and let the silence answer first. One morning, a spring opened its eyes, and the mist lifted from the valley. A soldier appeared. His name was Takeshi, and his armor, though worn, bore the crest of men who had killed many. He arrived not with violence, but with something heavier restlessness. He claimed he had heard of a monk who was unshakable, and he wished to test it. He approached Ryu with sharp eyes and sharper tone. "I have done things," he said, "that make priests tremble." Ryu nodded and offered him tea. "I have killed," the soldier continued, "burned villages, taken lives that did not belong to me, Ryu poured the tea without spilling a drop. Do you not judge me? Takeshi barked. No, said Ryu. Judgment clouds the tea. The soldier scowled. You are like the others, afraid to say truth. Ryu smiled. I do not fear truth. I just do not throw it like a stone. Takeshi stayed. Days passed. He tried to provoke the monk. He questioned him, challenged him, shouted in the night. And still, Ryu remained steady, like bamboo that bends but does not break. Eventually, the soldier stopped shouting. He began to listen. He noticed things, how the wind moved through the bamboo and never once asked it to stop swaying. How Ryu, in his stillness, seemed to feel more than those who constantly spoke. One evening, as cicadas sang in the dark, Takeshi sat beside Ryu and said softly, How do you not react? Are you empty inside? Ryu shook his head. No, I am full of what? Space. Space for what? For the wind to pass through, for the anger to rise and fall, for the fear to visit and then leave. Takeshi lowered his gaze. My mind is not like that. It strikes first, then asks later. Ryu said, Bamboo does not push against the wind. It dances. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. The soldier stayed for 3 months. He never took vows. He never gave up his sword. But when he left, he walked differently, not lighter, but looser, as if something inside him had stopped bracing. Before he departed, he asked Ryu one last question. If someone strikes you, would you not defend yourself? Ryu responded, I would act, if needed, but not react. Reaction is fire. Action is water. Takeshi nodded. And what if the world burns? Ryu answered, then be the breeze. That cools it, not the flame that feeds it. Years later, travelers who visited the hermitage would speak of the bamboo forest as sacred, not because of what had been built there, but because of what had been dissolved: anger, pride, the need to always win. And on certain days, when the wind was strong, it would move through the bamboo with a sound not unlike laughter, or prayer, or perhaps both. In Zen teachings, there is a profound difference between reacting and responding. To react is immediate, often unconscious, driven by habit or emotion. To respond is deliberate, spacious, informed by awareness. The sixth patriarch Huinin once said, the mind should be like a mirror, reflecting but not clinging, aware but not grasping. This does not mean we become passive or indifferent. It means we learn to act from clarity, not chaos. The story of Ryu and Takeshi reflects the training of equanimity, what Buddhism calls upekkha, the inner balance that allows one to face both insult and praise, gain and loss, with the same still gaze. In modern psychological language, this is the cultivation of emotional regulation. Many people today are taught to suppress their emotions or to express them without pause. But Zen offers a third path, the art of observing emotion without fusing with it. Anger arises. We see it. Fear arises. We name it. Desire arises. We breathe with it, and in doing so, we create space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl once wrote, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. This space is the wind through the bamboo. Tonight, I invite you to notice your breath, not to change it, just to notice. Then, recall a moment recent or long ago where you reacted harshly, where your words came sharp or your silence was heavy, with judgment now. Imagine that moment again, but this time, imagine space, space before the reply, space before the tightening of the jaw, space before the story in your head took over. What would have changed? You are not the reaction. You are the awareness watching it. Let that awareness grow. Breathe in. Let the wind pass through. Breathe out. Let the leaves return to stillness. In a world that demands instant responses, the one who pauses holds the real power. Do not mistake gentleness for weakness. It takes great strength to be soft in a hard moment. Like bamboo, you can bend without breaking, and in that bending you find freedom. Shall we continue? The next story rises with the morning mist, where broken things still shine, and imperfection reveals something holy. Story 6. The broken bowl. There was once a potter who lived in a quiet village near the sea. His name was Eiji, and his hands had shaped clay since he was a boy. His shop was modest, nothing more than a shed behind his home, but those who visited often left with more than bowls or cups. They left with the hush of something remembered, something softer than thought. Eiji never hurried. He sat at his wheel each morning as the sun rose, the sea breeze brushing through the window, the scent of salt and earth blending with the warmth of the kiln. He shaped the clay gently, as if coaxing memory from the mud. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice sounded like the tide, measured, inevitable, kind. One afternoon, a traveler arrived. She was middle-aged, cloaked in worn clothes, her posture stiff with the weight of exhaustion. She had heard of Eiji from a friend in a nearby village who said, "If your heart is broken, speak to the potter. He will not heal you, but he will show you how to live with it." She entered the shop quietly, her eyes scanning the shelves. The ceramics were simple bowls, plates, vases, all with irregular shapes, cracks that had been filled with gold, and glazes that pooled like rain. "In the curves, these are broken," she said, almost accusingly. Eiji looked up from his wheel. "No," he said. "They've been broken. Now they're whole again." She frowned. "You don't hide the cracks." He smiled gently. "Why should I hide what makes them beautiful?" She picked up a small tea bowl. A jagged line curved through its side, filled with shimmering gold. "What do you call this?" "Kintsugi," he replied. "The art of golden repair. When something breaks, we do not discard it. We honor its history. We fill the wounds with care, not shame." The woman held the bowl closer. Her eyes softened. "I came here," she said, "because I've been trying to erase everything that's happened, my divorce, the things I said, the silence I couldn't hold. I thought healing meant going back to how things were." Eiji stood and walked to a shelf. He picked up another bowl, nearly identical in size, but with different cracks. "This one," he said, "shattered into 7 pieces. It took weeks to rejoin. Every time I tried to smooth it too perfectly, it resisted. The lines refused to disappear. So you left them. I listened to them. I let them tell the truth." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "May I make one?" Eiji nodded. "If you are willing to let it break first." She hesitated. "Break it." He handed her a small cup. "Drop it, and then stay." She held it in both hands, her fingers trembling. She lifted it and let it fall. It cracked, not completely, but enough to change it. For the next 3 days, she stayed in the potter's shed. She learned how to gather the pieces, how to clean the edges, how to mix the lacquer and the gold. It was delicate work, sometimes frustrating. She cut her finger. She cursed, she wept, but she also breathed differently. She moved slower. She watched the light as it changed across the room. And when the bowl was whole, again lined with fine veins of gold, she did not see failure. She saw herself, not as she had been, but as she had become. When she left, Eiji gave her the bowl. "It will never be what it was," he said. She nodded. "I wouldn't want it to be." Years later, Eiji's shop remained, though his hands had grown stiff. The traveller's bowl still sat on her table, where she drank tea each morning. She never tried to hide the lines. In fact, she traced them, sometimes with her fingers, like old scars that no longer stung. And when friends came with their own quiet aches, she would pour them tea into that bowl and say, "Let me tell you a story about a potter, a broken cup, and the gold that holds it together." And they would listen, not just with their ears, but with the broken parts of themselves. And something would soften, like clay, like forgiveness, like a heart no longer afraid of its own cracks. In Zen, imperfection is not a flaw. It is the doorway to beauty. The cracked bowl, the uneven step, the scar on the face of a statue, these are not mistakes. They are reminders that life is not meant to be polished, but lived. There is a teaching that says, when you understand, things are just as they are. When you do not understand, things are just as they are. This is the wisdom of acceptance, not resignation, but gentle recognition of reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. The Buddha taught that all compounded things are subject to decay. But he also taught that the mind, when awakened, is when the body, the heart, or the story is not. In modern therapy, especially in trauma work, there is a movement toward integration rather than erasure. We do not pretend the wound never happened. We learn how to carry it differently. We shape a new story around it. Kintsugi is more than art. It is metaphor for psychological resilience. For the choice to say, yes, I have been broken, but I am still here, and there is beauty in what I've become. Perfection is brittle. It cracks easily, but authenticity is flexible. It holds. Healing, like pottery, is slow. It cannot be rushed. It demands presence, patience, and the courage to see our damage not as shame but as texture, as strength. So tonight, I invite you to close your eyes. Picture a bowl in your hands. It may be chipped, broken, or whole. Now imagine gold filling, its cracks not to hide them, but to celebrate them. This is your life, not despite the pain, but shaped by it. Ask yourself, what have I been trying to erase? What if I honored it instead? What if my healing is not a return, but a remaking? You are not broken, you are becoming. Let the gold settle in, and when you are ready, pour tea. The next story waits at the edge of the light, where the candle flickers. In the rain, and gratitude finds its voice in the most unlikely places. Story 7. The candle in the rain. It had been raining for 3 days without pause. Not a storm, not a thunderous spectacle, but a steady, relentless downpour that blurred the hills, soaked the soil, and washed away even the outlines of familiar paths. In a mountain village, tucked between ridges, where lanterns swung on wooden porches and moss grew like memory between stones, the sky had forgotten the color of blue dot. In one of the smallest homes, behind a curtain of bamboo reeds and water windows, a young woman sat beside her father's bed. He had been sick for months, the kind of sickness that does not scream, but whispers steadily, the kind that erodes, like water eating away at rock. His breaths were shallow, like the hush of falling leaves, and his eyes fluttered only now and then, as if the effort to stay was already too much. Her name was Aiko, and she had returned home after 7. Years away, 7 years of building a life in the city, chasing certainty, chasing light. But when the letter came, short and unadorned, he is fading, she left everything. No farewell, no notice. Just a train, and then another. And then the long walk through mud and memory to the house where she was born. She had not spoken to her father much before he became ill. Their last words had been sharp. She had wanted to leave, to see the world. He had wanted her to stay. They both loved each other too much to agree. Now he could not speak, and she had more words than hours. The days blurred. Rain fell. She fed him when he could eat. She wiped his forehead when the fever returned. She sat in silence when all that was left was presence, and yet there was something she could not shake. A bitterness, a sense of loss before the loss. She found herself waking each morning not in sadness but in resentment, of what she had missed, of what could have been, of time wasted, time too late, until one evening the old priest came. He was small and bent, walking with a staff carved from a tree that had long since fallen. He had known her father for decades and said nothing as he entered, only bowed deeply to her and sat beside the bed when the wind blew. The candle on the nightstand flickered violently. Echo moved to shield it. The priest gently held her wrist. "Let it be," he said. "Let it flicker. But if it goes out, then we will light it again." They sat in silence. The candle swayed. The rain whispered against the walls like a story half remembered. Finally, Eiko spoke. "I feel guilty," she said, "for leaving, for being angry, for not saying more." The priest nodded, double quotes, and still, he said, "You are here. But it doesn't feel like enough. Because you believe gratitude must come after the pain is gone," he said. "But sometimes the candle must be lit in the rain. Not because it will survive, but because it means something that we tried." She looked at him, eyes misted. "How can I be grateful when I'm losing him?" The priest smiled. Not kindly, not sadly, just truthfully, because you have him to lose. That night, when her father opened his eyes briefly, she took his hand not with regret, not with apology, but with reverence, not for what was missing, but for what was still there. She began to speak not to fill the silence, but to honor it. She thanked him for the way he carved her wooden toys as a child, for the quiet tea they used to drink on winter mornings, for the discipline she once called harsh but now called love, for the steadiness, for the waiting, for the roof that never leaked. He did not reply, but a tear slipped from the corner of his eye. The candle flickered and stayed lit. He died the next morning. Before sunrise, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. The sky remained heavy, but somewhere behind it there was a soft promise of light. Years later, Eiko would return to that house each winter. She would sit beside the hearth, light a candle, and let it flicker in the wind from the window. She never closed it, because sometimes the wind is not the enemy. Sometimes it is the breath of those who came before. There is a Zen saying, "Rain falls on all things equally, but it is up to us what we let it nourish." Gratitude is not only for joy. True gratitude arises not from having what we want, but from noticing what we have, even in the midst of grief, failure, or endings. The Buddha taught, "Let us rise up and be thankful, for if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we did get sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful." This is not blind optimism. It is trained attention. the art of seeing even one drop of light in the storm and bowing to it. In psychology, especially in trauma recovery, cultivating gratitude amid pain is not about denying suffering, it is about widening the lens. Our nervous systems are designed to fixate on threat, but when we choose to notice beauty, kindness, warmth, however small, we are practicing neurological resilience. The candle in the rain does not mock the storm, it simply refuses to disappear into it. So tonight, wherever you are, light a candle. In your mind, close your eyes. Breathe in the scent of rain. Let yourself feel the ache, the missing, the fatigue, and then ask, what remains? What is still here, flickering? It may be smaller memory, a touch, a quiet smile, but it is yours, and it is enough. Let the rain fall, let the grief stay, let the candle flicker, and still. Give thanks, because to feel is to live, and to live is already a kind of miracle. Shall we continue? The next story is already waiting beyond the gate where action begins with stillness, and every hesitation holds a seed of wisdom. Story 8. The gate that opens inward. There was once a traveler who spent his life chasing gates. He was born in a small town, where the hills curved gently and the wind carried stories from one house to another. As a child, he would sit at the edge of his family's garden and stare at the village gate, a tall wooden arch, painted red, standing between the dusty road and the world beyond. He dreamed of passing through it, believing that something better waited on the other side. And so, when he was of age, he left with a satchel, a map, and the certainty that happiness was elsewhere. He traveled from one province to another, from mountain temples to crowded cities. Each time he reached a new place, he was told of another, a better one, a purer one, a quieter one, a gate more sacred, more mysterious, more powerful. He became known as the man who searched for the perfect gate. Some admired his dedication, others pitied his restlessness. Years passed, his hair grayed, his steps slowed, and still he searched. Then one winter, he arrived at the foot of a solitary mountain where the snow fell like whispers and the sky hung low enough to touch. A path wound up the side of the slope, marked by nothing but stones, and frost at the top stood a hermit's hut. Inside, a monk stirred a small pot of rice porridge over a crackling fire. When the traveler knocked, the monk opened the door without surprise. "You've come far," the monk said. "I'm told the last gate is here," the traveler replied. The monk nodded. "It is. Can I see it?" "You already have." The traveler looked around. There was nothing, no archway, no carvings, no symbols. Just wind and silence. "I don't understand," he said. The monk gestured for him to sit. He poured him tea, fragrant and warm. "You've passed through 1,000 gates," the monk said. "But have you ever stopped at one long enough to ask where it truly leads?" "They lead to new lands," the traveler replied. "New beginnings. Isn't that their purpose?" The monk smiled. "Some gates lead outward, but the true gate," he said, placing a hand over his chest, "opens inward." The traveler sipped the tea. The taste was simple but rich. He could not remember the last time he had tasted anything without rushing. The monk continued, "You've spent your life seeking something that was never lost. The longing itself was not wrong, but the direction it was always turned outward." That night, the traveler stayed in the hut. He lay on a simple mat, covered in wool, listening to the fire crackle and the wind curl around the wooden walls. For the first time, he did not dream of elsewhere. He dreamed of a quiet garden, the scent of his mother's herbs, and a breeze from long ago. He wept not from sorrow, but from return. The next morning, he asked the monk, "What should I do now?" The monk answered, "Sit, close your eyes, breathe, and step through." The traveller obeyed. He sat on the floor. He breathed. He felt his heart tired, tender, waiting, and there, in the stillness, a gate opened. It had no wood, no hinges, no sound. But it opened, and for the first time in his life, he entered not a place, but himself. In Zen, there is a koan that asks, "How do you enter the gateless gate?" It is a riddle not to confuse the mind, but to free it. The gateless gate is a paradox. It cannot be seen, touched, or measured. It opens not through striving, but through surrender. The more we chase fulfillment outside through status, romance, travel, even spiritual experience, the more we become strangers to the quiet space within. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within." Do not seek it without. The traveller in our story was not wrong to seek, but seeking alone is not enough. One must also learn to stop, to turn, to face not the horizon, but the heart. In psychological healing, we often refer to the false self, the part of us shaped by external expectations, roles, and achievements. It's the version of us that performs, that accumulates, that never rests. Many spend their lives feeding this self, only to feel hollow. True healing begins when we ask not, "What must I do next?" but what is already here that I've ignored. The inward gate opens through stillness, reflection, and compassion toward ourselves. This is not passive, it is radical, to sit with one's own mind, one's own breath, one's own pain without distraction or escapes, to walk through the most difficult and necessary doorway of all. So tonight, I invite you to stop running. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and ask gently, where have I been going? What have I been chasing? What if the peace I seek is not ahead, but within? Picture a gate in your mind, not ornate, not grand, just simple, quiet, familiar. Now walk through, not to find a new world, but to return to the one that has been waiting inside you all along. Some gates creak when they open, some are silent, and some are silent, and some you never knew you had passed through until you finally stop, turn, and realize you are home. Shall we continue? The next story is already waiting, where the stream meets the stone, where resistance softens and uncertainty becomes the teacher. Story 9. The stone in the streaming A valley, cradled by hills, where the earth breathed mist every morning and silence wrapped around the trees like a shawl. There was a stream that never slept. It wasn't wide nor deep, but it moved with over roots and pebbles, carving its path with gentle insistence. Children in the village used to play by its banks, floating leaves in races, watching the water twist and skip. The elders, however, sat by it in silence, as if listening to something only age could hear. At the heart of the stream, wedged into its bed, stood a single moss-covered stone. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember. The water flowed around it, over it, sometimes crashing, sometimes caressing, but the stone did not move. The villagers called it the Heartstone. No one knew who had named it. No one questioned it. It simply was. One day, a young man named Ren came to the village. He had walked for days, through rain and fatigue, his face drawn tight with weariness. He was fleeing not from a place, but from a feeling he couldn't name. He had lost his job, his partner, his belief in what used to give his life meaning. His mind was noisy, his heart crowded. Stillness was something he no longer remembered. He stayed at the edge of the village, in a small hut offered by an old woman who never asked him why he had come. He didn't speak much, but each day he sat by the stream. He watched the water, he watched the stone. Something in it unsettled him. He couldn't explain it, but he kept returning. One afternoon, the village monk passed by. He was old, with eyes that moved like slow rivers, and hands that knew how to wait. Ren gestured to the stone. "It bothers me," he said. "I don't know why." The monk sat beside him. "Why?" Ren shrugged. "It just stands there, unmoved, while everything around it changes." The monk smiled. "Perhaps it is not the stone that bothers you, but what it reflects." Ren frowned. "I don't want to be stuck." "Is the stone stuck?" the monk asked. Ren paused. "It doesn't move." "No," said the monk. "It doesn't chase." They sat in silence for a long while. The stream whispered against the rocks. Then the monk said, "Sometimes peace is not in flowing like the water. Sometimes it is in being the stone." Ren visited the stream every day for a month. He brought nothing. He said little, but something began to shift. He stopped asking why the stone didn't move. He started asking what it meant to stay. He noticed how the water shaped the stone, softened its edges, but never wore it away. He noticed how fish swam in its shadow, how leaves rested beside it before continuing on. He noticed how the world never stopped changing, and yet the stone was always part of it, not resisting, just being. One morning, he woke before the sun. He walked to the stream. He took off his shoes and stepped in. The cold water wrapped around his ankles, sharp but honest. He walked slowly toward the heartstone, placed his hand on it, and closed his eyes. He did not pray. He did not ask for anything. He simply stood there, still, present. For the first time in months, he was not trying to fix anything. He was not running. He was simply here, and it was enough. There is a Zen teaching that says, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. This is the wisdom of stillness. In a world obsessed with movement, with goals, with improvement, Zen asks a radical question. Can you sit? Can you remain? Not as an escape, but as an embrace of what is. The stone in the stream does not resist the water. It allows, it participates, and yet it remains grounded. In Buddhism, this is the practice of stability, what some call samatha, calm, abiding. It is the strength of not being pulled by every current, not reacting to every splash, not needing to chase every ripple. It is the choice to return to center. In modern therapy, we often speak of emotional regulation, the ability to stay with discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. Many people believe peace comes when the chaos stops, but sometimes peace is what allows you to stand within the chaos and not lose yourself. The stone is not numb, it is rooted. You do not become less human by being still. You become more fully present, and in that presence you meet yourself, not the self that performs or achieves, but the self that endures, the self that breathes. So tonight, wherever you are, picture the stream of your life, fast or slow, clear or murky, and then place a stone in the center. That stone is your breath. That stone is your body. That stone is your presence. Close your eyes, feel the water of thought rush past, feel the current of feeling swirl around you. Do not move, do not chase. Simply notice and ask, what if peace is not something I find? What if peace is what I become when I stop moving? The world will keep flowing. Let it. You are allowed to be still. You are allowed to stay, and in staying, something will settle, not outside, inside, and the stream will remember you, not as a traveler, but as one who returned. Shall we continue? The next story begins where silence meets waiting, and a fisherman learns to listen to what cannot be caught. Story 10. The Silent Fisherman. There was a village that kissed the edge of a great lake, where the water was so still at dawn that the sky itself would lean down and gaze at its own reflection. The people of the village rose early and slept with the stars. Life moved with the seasons, planting, harvesting, mending, resting. But for all their rhythm and custom, there was one man who puzzled them. He was called the Silent Fisherman. Each morning, before the light touched the reeds, he walked barefoot to the dock, carrying only a bamboo rod, a small basket, and a flask of tea. He never spoke. He never seemed in a hurry. He never joined the market chatter or the gossip that flowed like wind through the stalls. He would sit at the end of the dock for hours, unmoving. His line cast gently into the water, sometimes catching nothing at all. Children whispered about him. Some said he had taken a vow of silence after losing his family to a fire. Others believed he was once a monk who had come down from the mountains, abandoning enlightenment for the simplicity of fish and morning light. But no one knew the truth. He never explained. One day, a young man from the village named Kota approached him. Kota had just returned from the city, his hands still soft from a desk job, his eyes quick with urgency. He had come back after burning out, tired, hollow, unsure what came next. He watched the fisherman for 3 days, growing more restless each time. On the 4th day, he walked out to the dock and stood beside him. I don't understand, Kota said. You sit here for hours and sometimes catch nothing. Doesn't it feel like a waste? The fisherman poured him tea without speaking. Kota took it, puzzled. Don't you want more? He asked. More fish, more certainty, more progress. The fisherman turned slightly and looked at him, not with impatience, but with a quietness so complete it stilled the air around them. Then he spoke, just once. I don't fish to catch, he said. I fish to listen. Kota blinked. Listen to what? To the lake, to myself, to what is ready to rise. And then he said no more. Kota sat beside him, uncertain at first, but curiosity anchored him. He stayed the morning. He returned the next day and the day after. He noticed things. The sound of dragonflies hovering over lily pads, the way the water shimmered differently as the clouds shifted, the rhythm of his own breath slowing, like a bird folding its wings. One morning, a small fish tugged at his line. He lifted it, admired its silver body flickering in the light, then gently released it back into the water. He didn't know why, only that it felt right. He turned to the fisherman. I think I'm starting to understand. The fisherman nodded. You stopped reaching, he said. So the lake gave something freely. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in years, Kota felt full, not with answers, but with something softer, a knowing that didn't need words. In Zen, the act of fishing is often used as metaphor, not for catching, but for presence. The true practitioner is not casting for gain, but for grounding. The line becomes a thread between this moment and the next, between self and silence. There is a teaching in the Mahāyāna, the gateless gate, that says, when the mind does not dwell in the past, nor chase the future, it meets the truth directly. This is the teaching of the silent fisherman. He does not strive, he does not force, he listens, he waits, and in his waiting, the world comes forward, not because it is demanded, but because it is invited. In psychological terms, this story reflects the principle of non-stravina, core tenet in mindfulness-based therapy. Modern life teaches us that value comes from effort, from constant motion, from measurable outcomes. But healing, growth, even creativity, these do not bloom under pressure. Sometimes, the most transformative moments come when we stop grasping. Non-striving is not passivity, it is receptivity. It is the art of letting life unfold without chasing it. In therapy, clients are often surprised to discover that their greatest clarity arises not from analysis, but from awareness, from stillness. So tonight, close your eyes. Imagine yourself at the edge of a quiet lake. There is no noise, no rush, no deadline. You hold a rod not to catch, but to connect. Feel the air, the water, the weight of being. Ask yourself, where have I been chasing? What am I trying to force? Can I release the line and simply listen? You may find that the fish you once ran after now swim to your feet. You may find that silence answers questions words never could. You may find that by doing less, you begin to live more. Let the water speak. Let the world rise to meet your stillness. And when you are ready, let the line drift. You are not empty. You are open. You are not idle. You are here. Shall we continue? The next story is forming like mist. In the mountains where a great force shifts without movement, and patience moves mountains without ever taking a step. Story 11. The mountain that moved itself there was once a mountain that everyone believed would never move. It rose in the northern plains, where the wind swept across the grasslands and the seasons painted the earth in bold, slow strokes. The villagers who lived nearby had grown up with its shadow. It loomed behind them in every festival, every firelit tale, every childhood drawing. The elders said the mountain had always been there, older than memory, rooted in place by time itself. They called it Mount Nerio, the unmoving one. Children would ask, what's behind it? And the elders would chuckle, nothing you need to see. But one day, a boy named Shoma stood at the edge of his family's rice field, staring at the mountain with something different in his eyes. Not fear, not reverence, but longing. He had never left the village. His parents said there was no reason to. His teachers said there was enough to learn here. But the mountain pulled at him, not because he wished to climb it, but because he wished to know what it was hiding. At night, he dreamed of vast valleys behind it, strange stars that only shone on the other side. He dreamed of rivers running in directions he had never seen, and so, on his 17th birthday, he announced, "I'm going." To move the mountain, the villagers laughed, not unkindly, but dismissively. "Many have tried," they said. "It is not meant to move." But Shoma was quiet in his conviction. He did not bring shovels or rope or dynamite. He brought a cup, and every day, at sunrise, he walked to the base of Mount Nerio, scooped a single cup of earth, and carried it to the other side. It was foolish. Some said, poetic, said others. But mostly, it was forgotten. Seasons passed, people left the village, others arrived, children grew, married, and had children of their own, and still, each day, Shoma walked one cup, then another, and another years. Turned the boy into a man, then an elder, his hair grayed, his steps slowed, his back bent, but the rhythm never changed. One morning, as the village prepared for the harvest festival, a child asked, "Who is that man?" His mother replied, "That's Shoma, the one who thinks he can move the mountain." The child frowned. Why does he still do it if it doesn't work? The mother paused, unsure. That evening, the child snuck away and followed Shoma on his walk. He watched him scoop the earth, carry it in silence, then return. The boy asked, "How much have you moved?" Shoma looked at the child. He smiled, and, for the first time in decades, he spoke a full sentence. Enough to know the mountain isn't the only thing that changes. The next day, Shoma did not rise. The cup sat by the door, and the villagers, moved by something they hadn't expected, began to carry it in his stead, one by one, not to finish what he started, but to remember what he had become, and in time, though. No one could say exactly when they realized the path around the mountain had become a valley, a soft, curved line where the earth dipped just enough to see the other side. No explosion, no fanfare, just decades of quiet, patient presence, and on clear mornings, when the mist pulled back, the sun would rise just behind the slope where Shoma once walked, and the villagers would say, "The mountain moved." In Zen, great change is often invisible. We are taught to value speed, impact, and noise, but the deepest transformations do not shout. They hum, they pulse, they breathe through small, consistent acts. The mountain did not need to crumble, it needed to be seen differently. There is a Zen proverb that says, "Sit quietly, doing nothing. Spring comes, and the grass grows by itself." Shoma did not move the mountain in the way people expected. He moved what mattered: perception, persistence. The quiet rebellion of showing up without reward. In psychological growth, there's a concept called micro-shifting. It's the practice of making small, repeated changes so small they feel insignificant, but done with consistency. They rewire patterns, reshape beliefs, shift trauma. We often underestimate what patience can do. We give up because results are not immediate, but healing doesn't explode. It unfolds. And strength doesn't roar. It walks, one cup at a time. So tonight, I invite you to picture your own mountain. It may be fear, regret, a past you can't seem to let go. What if you stopped trying to climb it in one day? What if you simply picked up a cup? What if your only task today was to show up, not to finish, but to stay faithful to the work? Close your eyes, breathe in, breathe out. Feel the weight of your mountain now. Feel your feet on the earth. Feel your hands open, ready. Ask yourself, what is one small action I can take? What if patience is not weakness? What if slow is sacred? The mountain may never move the way you want, but you will, and that movement will be enough. It already is. Shall we continue? The next story is waiting in the still pool of a mirror that reflects nothing but shows everything, where identity dissolves and clarity begins. Story 12. The mirror in the mist. There was a time, long ago, in a quiet forest cloaked in evergreen mist, where a small temple stood forgotten by the world. Few pilgrims ever found their way there, and those who did rarely returned the same. Within that temple lived an old monk named Kiji, who had not spoken a word in over 30 years. He tended to the moss-covered stones, swept fallen pine needles from the prayer path, and lit incense every morning before sunrise. But his most curious task, known only to a few who'd heard the legend, was polishing a mirror that no one ever saw. This mirror, it was said, hung behind the altar in the innermost chamber shrouded in veils, invisible to visitors, and yet Kiji polished it each morning with a white cloth, slow and patient, even if no one came to look. One day, a woman named Rina arrived. Her eyes were hollow from years of wandering, her voice strained from shouting into the void of modern life. She had tried therapy, retreats, pills, journals. She had tried running away and running toward, but the weight of not knowing who she truly was never left her. The villagers told her of the monk and his hidden mirror. If you look into it, one whispered, you will see your true self. But no one has ever seen it, said another. Rina didn't care. She was tired of mirrors that only showed her face, never her truth, so she climbed through fog and wind, and when she arrived at the temple gates, she bowed low and asked, Master Kiji, may I see the mirror? The old monk said, nothing. But he looked at her with eyes that had seen countless seasons, and something in his silence told her to wait. She stayed. One day turned into three into a week. She helped sweep the leaves, carried buckets from the stream, and sat in meditation, though her legs ached and her mind screamed. Each morning, she watched the monk walk into the inner chamber with his cloth and disappear behind the curtain. One evening, she could no longer bear the question, why do you polish a mirror no one sees? For a long time, he did not answer. Then, in a voice like the wind rustling through bamboo, he said only, so that I may remember what is reflected. The next day, he motioned for her to follow. He led her through the inner sanctum, past carved doors and weathered scrolls, to a space so still it made her breath catch. At the center, behind a sheer veil, stood the mirror. But when Kiji pulled the veil aside, Rina saw only herself, dusty, tired, uncertain. She looked confused. I don't see anything special. The monk pointed gently, not at the glass, but at her hands. They were shaking. Her throat tightened. I thought it would show me something real. He whispered, it just did. In Zen, there is a saying, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. We often mistake signs for truth, roles for identity, masks for essence. We seek clarity as if it lies outside us in books, teachers, reflections. But the real mirror is in the noticing, the tremble of your hands, the ache in your heart, the stories you tell about yourself when you think no one is watching. The mirror does not lie, but neither does it speak. It waits, quietly, until you are ready to see what you already carry. Modern psychology calls this radical self-acceptance, not the idea that we love every part of ourselves, but that we stop running from what is there. The anxiety, the grief, the self-doubt, not enemies, just mirrors, reflecting the parts of you asking to be held. Therapy may offer frameworks, meditation may calm the waves, but the deepest healing often begins when we stop demanding that the mirror show us something different. Start listening to what it has been saying all along. So tonight, sit quietly, feel your breath, place your hands where your heart beats, not to fix, not to judge, just to notice. Ask yourself, what part of me have I refused to see? Where does my reflection shake? What am I hiding behind achievement, busyness, or silence? There is no perfect version of you waiting to be unlocked. There is only this moment, this breath, this being beautiful not because it shines, but because it is willing to be seen just as it is. When the woman left the temple weeks later, she still did not know who she was, but she no longer needed to. For the first time, she could sit with the question without fear. She knew the mirror was still there, not in the temple, but in every moment she chose to be honest, present, and kind to others, to herself. The mist never cleared completely, but she no longer needed it to, because now she carried her own light. Shall we continue? The next story comes not from the forest, but from a small bell that refuses to ring until the silence around it learns to listen. Story 13. The bell that refused to ring. The old monastery on the hill was known not for its size or its fame, but for a single brass bell that had remained silent for over 100 years, crafted in an era long forgotten. The bell hung under the wooden eaves of the meditation hall, suspended like a slumbering heart. Its surface was etched with lotus flowers, dharma wheels, and a verse from the Dhammapada. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an untrained mind. Every morning the monks would bow to the bell before sitting in zazen, but none dared to ring it. It was not out of fear but reverence, for it was said that the bell would only ring when someone truly heard it before striking. Many had tried, some with intellect, others with emotion, even a few with desperation, but the bell remained still. Then, one autumn, a young novice named Sora arrived. He was neither wise nor particularly patient. In fact, he had come to the monastery not for enlightenment, but to escape. He had lost his job in the city, endured a broken relationship, and had spent months spiraling in a sea of anxiety. I need to find peace, he told the abbot. The old man only smiled. You are welcome to stay, but remember, peace is not something you find, it is something you stop losing. Sora didn't understand, but he stayed. For weeks he followed the rhythm of the monastery, waking at dawn, sweeping the paths, washing bowls, attending Dharma talks. But inside he was restless. He compared himself to the others. He judged his thoughts during meditation. He resented how slowly things moved. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the tiles, he wandered toward the silent bell. He stood beneath it and whispered, I just want to feel something real. He struck it with the wooden mallet. Nothing, not even a hollow thud, just silence. He tried again the next day, and the day after that, but the bell refused to ring. In his frustration, he went to the abbot. I've done everything. I meditate, I serve. I even memorized the Heart Sutra. Why won't the bell respond? The abbot studied him carefully and said, Would you like to hear a story? Sora nodded, impatient. There was once a man, the abbot began, who sat beside a frozen lake, pounding the surface with a cup, demanding water. He believed effort alone would free it, but the ice did not melt. Not until the sun rose not from him, but on its own. Sora frowned. So you're saying I should wait? I'm saying, the abbot replied gently, that trying harder is not the same as hearing deeper. That night, unable to sleep, Sora sat alone by the bell. He stopped thinking about ringing it. He stopped trying to find peace. He simply listened to the cicadas in the distance, to the wind nudging leaves, to the sound of his own breath, and somewhere, within the stillness, he noticed something he had never heard before. The soft hum beneath everything, the silence that wasn't absence, but presence. His heartbeat slowed, his thoughts untangled. He wasn't seeking, he wasn't escaping, he was just there, without reason, without trying, just listening. He stood without rush, and picked up the mallet not to test the bell, but to honor it. And when the mallet touched the rim, the sound that emerged was unlike anything he'd known. It was not loud, it was not showy, but it was infinite, a single, perfect tone that seemed to rise from the center of the earth, pass through every cell in his body, and dissolve into the sky. Monks came running, barefoot, robes fluttering in the wind. The abbot arrived last. He smiled, eyes wet with something between pride and peace. "You heard it," he whispered. So R.A. said nothing. He knew words would only lessen what was felt in Buddhism. Especially in Zen, there is a teaching. When the student is ready, the teaching appears. But the readiness is not a matter of learning more, achieving more, or striving harder. It is about becoming still enough to recognize what has always been. Modern life tells us to push, to hustle, to prove. But healing rarely comes from noise. Clarity does not come from shouting at our pain. Peace is not the end of effort, it is the pause between efforts. In therapy, this principle echoes in the work of attunement. A therapist does not fix your wounds. They sit with them. They hear what hasn't been heard. And in that deep listening, transformation begins, not because of advice, but because of presence. We are all, in a way, like the silent bell, waiting not for someone to strike us, but for someone to truly hear. And sometimes, that someone must be ourselves. So tonight, wherever you are, do not try to force the sound. Do not hammer at the silence. Instead, sit with it. Place your hand over your chest. Feel the beat and ask, where am I still demanding sound? What in me is asking to be heard, not fixed? Can I offer myself the listening I have been seeking from the world? The bell does not withhold. It waits until your attention becomes love, until your listening becomes stillness. Then it will ring not in your ears, but in your being, and you will know. You were never seeking peace. You were always peace, waiting to stop seeking. Shall we continue? The next story comes from a broken bowl, mended not with gold, but with surrender. Story 14. The Merchant and the Moon. There was once a merchant named Ru, who lived in the port city of Anami, where the winds carried the scent of salt and opportunity. His life was measured in accounts and contracts, in the rise and fall of currencies, in the shimmer of silk and the weight of spices. He was sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, respected by many, feared by more. Ryu was the kind of man who could turn misfortune into profit. If a typhoon destroyed another man's ships, Ru bought the remaining goods at half price and sold them double the next day. If war broke out in the north, he rerouted his trade and capitalized on scarcity. He prided himself not just on being lucky, but on being in control. One winter, he visited a small inland village, seeking to acquire a rare kind of blue dye that was said to be extracted from a flower that bloomed only under moonlight. The villagers led him to a humble craftsman named Arji, who lived alone at the edge of a bamboo grove. Arji's hands were stained with the indigo of his trade. His house was made of wood and silence. He bowed politely when Ru arrived, but did not smile. "I hear your dye is the finest in the land," Ru said. Arji nodded. "I make only a small amount each season. I'll buy it all, whatever price you name." The craftsman hesitated, then replied, "It is not for sale in that way." Ju frowned. "Everything has a price." Arji looked up at the sky, A pale moon was rising. Not this. The flower only opens when the moon is full and the wind is still. I do not force it. I wait. Rue was silent, annoyed but intrigued. Eiji added, "Would you care to stay the night? The moon is almost full." That night, the merchant lay on a mat of woven reed, sleepless. He was unused to quiet that wasn't broken by trade. No voices, no ink, no silver coins clicking against wood. Only wind in the bamboo. Only the low, eternal hum of insects. He watched the old man walk barefoot into the forest with a clay bowl. Hours later, he returned with a faint blue stain on his fingers. "This is how it begins," he said softly, "not by taking, but by being present when the world offers." Rue said nothing, though something in his chest felt strangely soft, like rice before it hardens in the sun. Years passed. Rue became wealthier still. He built a manor with wide walls and high ceilings. Yet each time he looked at the moon, he remembered the dye that only came from patience. Then came the collapse. A merchant house defaulted. A bridge to the north fell in a flood. War began again. His ships were delayed, then sunk. In 2 seasons, Rue lost almost everything. He sat alone in his vast home, now empty of servants. Where once there had been silver, there was now dust. He wandered through the silent rooms and finally out to the garden. There, in the stillness of night, he saw the full moon hanging above the trees, and he remembered, without knowing why, he packed a small bag and returned to the village of an army. He walked the same dirt road, past trees that had grown old in his absence. When he reached the bamboo grove, he found Eiji's house, abandoned. The door creaked open, revealing mats rolled up, bowls cracked, ink faded. But outside, beside a stone basin, a blue flower bloomed under the moon. No one harvested it, no one waited with a clay bowl, but it bloomed anyway. He sat there, until dawn, listening, and something inside him gave way, not like breaking, but like a knot gently loosening after years of being pulled tight. Zen often speaks of the moon not as something to be reached, but something to be reflected in still water. The moon appears. In stormy waters, it vanishes, but it has never moved. So it is with peace, with joy, with meaning. We chase, we build, we gather, but sometimes life does not ask us to conquer. It asks us to wait, not in passivity, but in presence. In modern psychology, we are familiar with control, the need to manage outcomes, the addiction to productivity, the illusion of certainty. But beneath that lies a more ancient wisdom, the ability to sit with the unknown, the ambiguous, the delicate, distress tolerance, mindfulness, emotional regulation. These are not just techniques, they are echoes of a deeper truth. Not everything bends to effort. Some flowers bloom only in stillness. What are you trying to force right now? What have you been chasing that may only arrive when you finally stop running? Is it love, healing, a sense of home? Can you sit long enough beneath the moon of your own life, without grasping, without fleeing, and simply let it appear? The merchant learned, too late, what could not be bought, but you. You have this moment, this breath, this chance, to become the still bowl beneath the sky, to stop seeking the dye, and let the dye stain you quietly in the night of your surrender. Tonight, as you lie in silence, imagine the blue flower. Imagine its fragile petals, opening not from command, but from rhythm. You are not broken, you are not behind, you are blooming at the pace of the moon. Next, we meet a monk who threw away his robe's knot. to abandon the path, but to find it where he least expected. Story 15. The monk who burned the scriptures. It was late autumn in the highlands of Jogan province. The trees stood bare, like monks in silence, their golden leaves already surrendered to the earth. Wind brushed the surface of a lake that rarely saw visitors, except for one figure who returned every season, a monk named Dato. He was known not for his teachings, but for what he had once done, years ago. Daito had shocked the monastery he belonged to by setting fire to a 1,000-year-old copy of the Mahāyāna, scrawled the perfection of wisdom in 8,000 lines. An original, hand-inked, preserved through centuries. Gone in smoke and ashdot when the abbot confronted him, Daito bowed low and said, "It is better to lose a book than to lose the path." He was exiled the next morning, yet Daito had never been angry, nor did he defend himself. He walked from the monastery with nothing but his robes and an empty satchel. Many thought him mad. A few whispered he had reached a level beyond understanding. The truth was more human. He had loved the scriptures. He memorized them with the reverence of a child, memorizing the lullabies of his mother. He could recite lines from the Paramati, the Dhammapada, the Lotus Scra, the Heart Scra, with effortless breath. He had built a shrine in his cell and offered incense daily. But one winter night, while meditating, he heard a scream. Outside the monastery gates, a woman, barefoot in the snow, sobbed as she cradled her dying child. The child's lips were blue. There was no warmth, no shelter. Dr. Aito looked round. The shrine glowed with soft candles, and he saw the scriptures handcopied on thick rice paper resting like sacred jewels, paper, dry, flammable. He paused, then, without words, he took the texts and fed them, sheet by sheet, into the fire pit in the courtyard. The flames rose. The woman and child sat beside the blaze. Slowly, color returned to the child's cheeks. By morning, the child was breathing, alive, and the scriptures gone. What followed was not applause. It was scandal, fury, tradition shaken. "How dare you," the senior monks said. "You destroyed the sacred words." Daito answered, "I lived them." Now, years later, Daito lived alone in a hut near the lake. He spent his days gathering firewood, fishing when needed, sitting beneath the stars in silence. People began to find him not by signs, not by sermons, but by word of mouth. A mother grieving a lost son came, and he taught her how to cry fully, without shame. A soldier haunted by war came, and Daito showed him how to bow to the ghost in his mind. A merchant whose riches brought no peace came, and Daito fed him rice and nothing more. He spoke little, but his eyes said everything. One night, a young scholar came to visit, eager, proud, restless. "Master Daito," the scholar said, "I've memorized the entire Diamond Scra. I can recite the 5 precepts, the 4 noble truths, and all the commentaries of Nagarjuna. I want to understand what you saw in that fire." Daito listened, then replied, "Recite the Scra for me." The scholar did flawless, without hesitation. When he finished, Daito nodded. "Now go to the village. There is a man dying without family. Sit with him until he passes. Say nothing. Just hold his hand." The scholar blinked. "But what about the teaching?" Daito smiled. "That is the teaching. Zen has long pointed beyond words. As the 6th patriarch Huineng once said, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Scriptures, like maps, are useful only if they guide you to walk. But when worshipped, they become cages. In Western psychology, this is echoed in the distinction between intellectual understanding and embodied experience. We may know that impermanence is real, that clinging causes suffering, that presence is healing, but unless we feel it, unless we live it, the knowledge stays trapped in the head, like light trapped in glass. Daito was not anti-scripture. He was pro-awakening. Modern seekers often accumulate teachings the way collectors accumulate antiques, carefully, protectively, pridefully. We quote Rumi, THCH, Nate Achin, Dalai Lama, yet still react with anger, still avoid our pain, still numb ourselves through distraction. True wisdom is not in what we can repeat, but in what transforms us. If you know that everything changes, can you let go of the past? If you know that clinging causes suffering, can you loosen your grip? If you know that presence heals, can you stop running from silence? Daito burned the scriptures because he trusted the Dharma was alive, not printed. He burned them because a child was dying. He burned them because the real fire was compassion. Tonight, as you listen in the quiet of your room, ask yourself, what have I clung to even when it was time to let go? What teachings do I say but not live? Can I burn the old stories that keep me frozen and offer their warmth to someone in need? The Dharma is not in the ink. It is in your breath, in your gaze, in your hands when they hold gently, in your presence when no one else shows up. Burn what must be burned and walk forward in silence. In truth, in Flame next, we will listen to the story of a young girl who spoke to ghosts not out of fear, but out of love. Story 16. The girl who listened to ghosts. The wind in the valley of Haizu carries more than the scent of pine and earth. If you walk its narrow path at dusk, they say you might hear the laughter of someone who is no longer alive, or the soft weeping of voices long forgotten. The villagers call them ghosts. They whisper their stories in candlelit corners. They avoid the old well near the forest and leave rice out by the riverbank during the full moon. But there was one girl, born in that valley, who never feared what others feared. Her name was Lin. From a very young age, Lin would sit for hours beneath the Bodhi tree behind her family's cottage. Her eyes would be half closed, her body still, her ears tilted as though she were listening to a distant flute. When her mother called her in for supper, she would sometimes reply, "Just a moment. Mama, the man by the tree hasn't finished speaking yet." Her parents worried, as all parents do. "You mustn't talk like that," her father warned gently. "There's no one there, Lin." But Lin only smiled. "Just because you cannot see them," she said softly, "doesn't mean they are not there." When Lin was 9, she began writing down the stories she heard. She kept a small notebook, worn and smudged, tucked into her robe. She wrote of a soldier who had died without saying goodbye to his mother, of a woman who had once hidden bread for her starving neighbors, only to perish in shame, falsely accused of stealing, of a boy who drowned in the river and never learned how to pray. "These are not scary stories," she once told the village priest. "They're stories that still need to be heard." The priest frowned. "Child, the dead are meant to rest." "But what if they can't?" Lin replied, "until someone listens." At 12, Lin began to visit those who were grieving. She would sit beside a widow in silence for hours. She would hold the trembling hand of a boy whose sister had died. In the fire, she didn't say much. She never claimed to speak to the dead. But she brought with her a stillness that felt like a warm blanket on a winter night. One evening, a monk passing through the village asked to see her. They sat by the edge of the lotus pond. Fireflies blinked like sleepy stars. "You have a gift," the monk said, But do you know what it is? Lin shook her head. You can hold what others are afraid of, the monk said. You listen to what most run from. That is not ghost sight. That is compassion. When she turned 16, Lin traveled to the nearby temple and asked to become a novice. The abbess hesitated. You're very young. Why do you wish to walk the way? Lin bowed and said, because I want to learn how to carry sadness without being drowned by it. Years passed. Lin studied sutras by candlelight, swept temple floors, tended to sick cats, and chanted with the other nuns. But every week she returned to the forest. She still heard the voices, but they began to change. They were no longer just the dead. They were the voices of the living who had been forgotten, the voice of the father who was never forgiven, the voice of the friend who was misunderstood, the voice of a self we all abandon the child within, the frightened one, the tender one we push away. Lin began to realize ghosts were not only spirits. Ghosts were the parts of us we refuse to look at, and they haunt us not with malice, but with longing. In the Zen tradition, there is a teaching. If you see a ghost, bow. It means when pain arises, don't turn away. When shame surfaces, don't bury it. When fear whispers, don't shout it down. Bow. In psychological terms, Lin was practicing radical acceptance. She was learning that healing begins not by fixing, but by listening. Trauma, grief, guilt, these are ghosts within us, and they ask not to be solved, but to be witnessed. Lin's practice became quiet and deep. She taught no formal Dharma talks, but people came from far away. They came to sit with her, not because she had answers, but because she made space. She would say, "Tell me your sorrow, and I will not flinch." One man confessed he had hit his child in anger. A woman revealed she had betrayed her best friend. Out of jealousy, an elder spoke of a lie he had told 60 years ago and never admitted. Lin never judged. She simply breathed, stayed, and opened her palms. The ghosts softened. The silence welcomed them home. In our modern world, we live surrounded by unseen grief. We scroll past pain. We bury our own. We perform strength. But underneath, there are restless spirits inside us, unresolved hurt, unspoken regret, unloved selves, and often they return. In our dreams, in our sudden outbursts, in our anxiety that we can't name. What Lin offered was not exorcism. It was invitation. She invited the ghost to sit at the table. She poured tea for it. She asked, "What is it you want to say that no one has let you say?" Psychologists now speak of parts work, of shadow integration, of the need to welcome the disowned parts of ourselves. But Lin had known this, not through theory, but through the art of deep listening. To listen without fear is to liberate. To listen without rushing to fix is to love. One day, many years later, Lin grew ill. Her breathing slowed. The nuns sat around her, weeping quietly. She looked up and whispered, "Don't be afraid of ghosts. They are just stories waiting to be loved." And then, like the last candle at midnight, her flame flickered out, but the silence she left behind glowed with presence. Tonight, as you rest, ask yourself, what ghosts visit me when the world grows quiet? Which parts of me have I banished for being too sad, too angry, too messy? Can I, just for tonight, let them speak? The Buddha said, in seeing things as they are, the heart is released. To see your ghost is to set it free. To listen without resistance is to heal. Let your heart be the house where nothing is unwelcome. Pour tea, bow, and listen. In our next story, we meet a man who chased enlightenment so hard, he almost missed it blooming beneath his feet. Story 17. The man who chased the moon. There was once a man who lived in the city of stone where concrete drowned the ground and windows glowed with restless light. His name was Hero. By day, Hero wore a suit and moved like clockwork. By night, he watched the moon from the roof of his apartment, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug. He believed, somehow, that if he could just get close enough to that glowing orb, it might tell him why everything still felt hollow. Hero was successful by society's measure. His job paid well. His apartment had 2 bedrooms, though he lived alone. He had no debts, no addictions. He exercised, ate well, read books, but something inside him never sat down. It paced. It reached for something it could not name. He often dreamed of a place with no walls. In the dream, he would run barefoot under the open sky, chasing a silver light just beyond the trees. Always, when he reached out, he awoke one evening. After a long meeting that ended in silence and screensavers, Hero passed an old bookstore on a side street he'd never noticed. In the window was a small wooden sign that read, "The moon is not the destination. Sit and let it find you." He paused. A bell above the door chimed as he stepped in. Inside, the shop was lit by warm lanterns. The air smelled of sandalwood and dust. A woman with silver hair and thick glasses looked up from behind the counter and said only, "You're late, Hero." Blinked, "I'm sorry." She smiled. "For your lesson," he half laughed, unsure if she was teasing. "I'm not a student. Everyone who suffers is," she replied, then gestured to the back. "He's waiting." In the quiet room behind the shop, a man sat cross-legged on a woven mat. He wore no robe, no necklace of beads, just loose linen and stillness. His presence felt like rain on dry earth. "I'm not here for a class," Hero said, half-dash apologetic. The man looked at him and said, "Then why are you here?" And Hero, without knowing why, replied, "Because I'm tired of searching." The man nodded, then "Stop running. Sit." Hero sat. That first session, they did nothing but breathe. No lectures, no answers. Just breath and silence. He left more confused than when he came, but also lighter, as though something in him had finally unclenched. He returned the next day, and the next weeks passed. Then months. He learned how to breathe without chasing, how to sit without wanting. He learned the difference between stillness and stagnation, and he began to see his life not as a series of empty boxes to check, but as a field he had never truly walked barefoot in. One rainy afternoon, Hero asked the teacher, "Why did you say the moon is not the destination?" The teacher smiled. "Because it is already reflected in every puddle." Hero frowned. The teacher leaned forward. "We spend our lives chasing beauty, peace, meaning, thinking they are far away, but they are in every moment. We only need to stop long enough to see." There is an old Zen koan. A student asks, "What is enlightenment?" The master says, "Chop wood, carry water." Later, the student asks, "What is enlightenment after awakening?" The master replies, "Chop wood, carry water." It means awakening does not change the world. It changes the way we meet the world. Hero began to notice things he had missed before. The way steam curled from his tea, like dancing spirits, the sound of wind moving through, scaffolding, the smile of the clerk at the market when she handed him change, the small sadness in the eyes of his boss, who always stayed late but never talked about his family. The moon no longer called him from afar. It was everywhere, in faces, in shadows, in silence. But one day, Hiro fell ill. A sudden fever, a deep fatigue, tests, hospitals, doctors who avoided eye contact, cancer, they said. Late stage, he stared at the ceiling of his hospital room and felt the old pacing thing inside him awaken again. I did everything right, he whispered. I followed the path. A nurse entered and gently adjusted his pillow. He turned to the window. The moon was rising over the city, soft and full. The teacher visited him that night. Hiro asked, "Did I fail?" The teacher sat beside him. "What is the moon, Hiro?" Hiro swallowed. "It's what I was always chasing." "No," the teacher said. "It was what was always inside you." Tears slipped down Hiro's cheek. "Then why am I still afraid?" He asked. "Because fear is the last ghost to bow to." The teacher replied, "From a psychological view, Hiro's journey reflects the pattern many face, the endless search for meaning in external achievements, followed by a crisis that shatters. The illusion in modern life we are taught to chase, status, wealth, enlightenment, even. But the chase itself is often the distraction. It becomes a coping mechanism to avoid stillness, where the real questions lie. When Hiro finally slowed down, he met his inner world, the grief, the longing, the forgotten parts of himself. And he learned to meet them without judgment. This is the core of therapeutic mindfulness, not to fix, but to be with. One evening, Hiro asked to be wheeled to the rooftop of the hospital. It was cold, and the nurse wrapped him in blankets. He looked up at the moon. He whispered, "You're not out. There are you." And in the stillness, a voice within replied, "No. I've been sitting inside you, waiting, every night you looked up." He passed away 2 nights later, not with despair, but with a slight smile. The pacing thing inside him had finally sat down. In Buddhism, we speak of the Tathagata, the one who has thus come and thus gone, the awakened one. But every one of us carries the seed of that awakening. It blooms not in temples, but in traffic, in illness, in heartbreak, in the quiet. Between thoughts, the moon doesn't move. We do. And sometimes the wisest thing we can do is stop. Tonight, as you prepare to sleep, ask yourself, what have I been chasing? What beauty is already here, unnoticed? What happens when I simply sit and let the moon find me? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. So sit. And if the silence scares you, stay a little longer. The moonlight will come, not because you ran to it, but because you stopped running. In our next story, we follow a widow who planted a garden of grief and found within it the bloom of acceptance. Story 18. The Widow's Garden. There was once a woman who lived on the edge of a quiet village, where mist settled gently on the hills each morning, and the crows called like forgotten lullabies at dusk. Her name was May. May had once laughed loudly. She had once sung while cooking and hummed while sweeping the porch. Her garden had been full of marigolds, green onions, and wild basil, which she tucked into her husband's lunches with care. But that was before the illness came like a thief in the dark and took her husband of 33 years. Before the house turned hollow. Before silence stopped being peace and became a scream no one could hear. For the first weeks after his passing, May left everything untouched. His shirts still hung in the closet. His slippers still sat by the door. She lived like a ghost haunting her own home. Neighbors came with soup and soft voices. They whispered, "He's in a better place," or at least he didn't suffer. But every word felt like dust in the mouth. None of it reached her heart. One morning, as the sun filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating the fine dust in the air, May looked out at her once thriving garden. Now, weeds strangled the roots, and the soil was hard as regret. She whispered, "If I don't do something, I will become like this." And so, she picked up the trowel. For days, she worked the earth in silence. She dug her fingers deep into the dirt, pulled out dead roots, turned the soil. Her knees ached, her back burned, but something in her began to shift. She didn't know what to plant, so she began with what she had: cuttings from old herbs, a few marigold seeds saved in a jar, a small sapling gifted by a friend long ago. Every morning she watered, every afternoon she weeded, not with hope, but with necessity. In the evenings she would sit by the window and sip tea. The house was still quiet, but the silence felt less sharp. One day, a young monk from the temple nearby passed by her gate. He paused and admired the garden, where green had begun to whisper through the soil. May looked up. "There's not much to see yet," he smiled, gently, "but the soil has changed." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He knelt beside the garden bed and touched the earth. "This soil has been turned. It has been wept into. It has been offered something deep." May looked away. "I didn't offer anything. I only lost." The monk replied softly, "Even loss, when offered fully, becomes transformation." There is a Zen parable of a woman, much like May. Her name was Kissa Gautami. After losing her only child, she wandered from house to house, clutching the lifeless body, begging for medicine. A kind man brought her to the Buddha. The Buddha said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death, and I will make medicine for your child." Kissa searched far and wide, but every home she entered had known grief, parents lost, children buried, partners mourned. She returned to the Buddha empty-handed, but changed. Through that search, she saw the universality of sorrow, that no one is spared. And in knowing this, she began to let go. May thought often of the monk's words. She began to whisper stories to her plants as she watered them, memories of her husband's laugh, his terrible singing, the way he always misbuttoned his shirt. She cried as she pruned. She smiled as she composted. The garden grew not just from sun and soil, but from her grief, composted into something living. One day, a neighborhood boy passed by and asked, "Why do you talk to your plants?" She answered, "Because they know how to listen." Psychologically, May's journey mirrors the process of grief integration, not grief elimination. Modern psychology acknowledges that grief doesn't go away with time. Instead, it becomes a part of us. What May does returning to the soil, engaging in daily acts of nurture, is a quiet form of exposure and processing. Each movement becomes ritual. Each ritual becomes healing. Unlike distraction, which avoids pain, ritual meets pain with presence. In this way, the garden becomes therapy, not because it fixes the loss, but because it holds space for it as seasons passed. May's garden transformed. Lavender began to bloom, bringing bees and soft fragrance. Tomatoes ripened red and sweet. The sapling had grown taller, casting dappled shadows where she sat with her tea. She even added a small wind chime to the porch. Its song was delicate like laughter remembered. Children sometimes stopped to admire the flowers. Strangers complimented her work, but May knew it wasn't work at all. It was remembering. It was breathing. It was her way back. She began hosting small tea gatherings. Nothing fancy, just warm water, quiet company, and the scent of mint. And earth, one afternoon, she stood before her thriving garden and closed her eyes. She whispered, "I still miss you." And in the breeze, she felt something not spoken, but present. A stillness, a gentle warmth in her chest, a presence without form. She did not need him to be alive to feel love. One of the deepest teachings of the Buddha is impermanence, anicca, that all things, no matter how precious, will change, dissolve, and pass. But there is also sanctity contentment, not the loud happiness of celebration, but the quiet smile that grows when we learn to live with what is. May, in her own way, had found sanctity not by forgetting, but by tending. So tonight, if you are grieving, if you are sitting in a room where a voice used to echo, if your hands feel empty and your days too quiet, know this: you do not have to fill the silence. You only have to sit with it. You do not have to erase your pain. You only have to tend it gently, as the Buddha said. As a mother would protect her only child with her life, so must one cultivate boundless love toward all beings, even the parts of yourself that hurt, especially those. May's garden still grows on the edge of the village, and sometimes, if you walk past in the early morning, you'll see her kneeling in the soil, whispering to the roots, planting new seeds, not only in earth, but in her own quiet heart. Now, close your eyes. Let your breath be like watering the garden of your own sorrow. Inhale gently, exhale fully, and ask yourself, what part of me needs tending? What memory do I keep in the dark? What would grow if I gave it my tears? In our next story, we follow a young man consumed by anger, and the old Zen master who taught him to sit with fire without being burned. Story 19. The Room of Echoes. There is a room in every heart that echoes. Sometimes it is the laughter of a friend now gone, the cry of a child no longer small, or the final words of someone we never got to say goodbye to. This story begins with a young man named Theo who came to a monastery high in the mountains, not for enlightenment, but for silence. He was not a monk, nor a scholar, but a man weary of voices especially his own. Theo had worked in the city for years, wearing polished shoes and tight smiles. His words sold ideas, plans, futures. He had mastered the language of success, deadlines, metrics, promotions, but his own heart, he hadn't spoken to it in years. He arrived at the temple with nothing but a small bag and a letter he never read aloud. His eyes were heavy, not with sleep, but with stories untold. The abbot, a kindly man with a voice like distant thunder, welcomed him without question. "You may stay," he said, "but the only room left is the room of echoes." Theo shrugged. "I just need quiet." The abbot only nodded. The room of echoes was small. A single mat, a low table, and a window that looked out on the clouds. But at night, Theo heard it a sound, soft at first, like the whisper of old regrets. A name, a memory, sometimes a sentence unfinished. He thought he was dreaming, but the next night the sounds grew clearer. "Why didn't you come sooner?" one voice said. "I waited," said another. He sat up, heart pounding. There was no one there. He searched the walls, the floorboards, the corridor. Nothing, only the wind, and the stars watching from afar. When he told the abbot, the old man smiled. Gently, "It is not the room that echoes. It is you." There is a Zen story of a young monk who came to his master in great distress. "I cannot silence my thoughts," he said. "They roar like waterfalls. I sit to meditate, and they scream." Louder, the master took him to a cave. "Sit here," he said. "Every time a thought arises, speak it aloud." The monk did as he was told. At first, his voice filled the space with anger, longing, confusion. He yelled, he wept, he laughed bitterly. But slowly, over days, his voice softened. Thoughts still came, but with less urgency. They became like guests, not invaders. Eventually, the cave echoed only his breath. Theo stayed in the room of echoes. Each night, the voices returned not as haunting spirits, but as fragments of himself, his father's disappointment, his mother's quiet crying behind closed doors, the friend he ghosted after a betrayal, the woman he loved but couldn't commit to, the child he had never met. They came not to accuse, but to be heard, and for the first time in years, Theo listened. He wrote their names down. He wrote letters he never sent. He sat with the pain, without trying to fix it. He wept. He did not try to be strong. He simply stayed. From a psychological perspective, what Theo experienced is known as integration. So many of us spend our lives exiling the parts of ourselves that feel shameful or painful. We compartmentalize, we distract, we numb, but the psyche does not forget. It echoes, especially in stillness. The room of echoes is not a building, is a metaphor for the inner chamber where memory, emotion, and identity intersect. Modern therapy calls this inner child work, parts work, or shadow integration. But the ancient Zen masters understood it differently. They did not aim to analyze the echo. They bowed to it. They listened until the echo revealed the original sound. One morning, Theo took a broom and began to sweep the temple courtyard. His movements were slow, deliberate. With each sweep, he imagined clearing not just leaves, but old griefs. The abbot passed by and said, "You're quieter now." Theo replied, "I still hear the echoes." The abbot smiled. "Good, they are becoming music." Theo looked puzzled. The abbot continued, "When we resist the echoes, they become ghosts. When we listen, they become songs." As weeks passed, Theo no longer feared the room. He began to sit in silence each night, welcoming whatever voice rose. Some were tender, some were sorrowful, some were angry, but all were his. He understood that healing was not silencing. Healing was allowing every part of him to take a seat at the fire. There is a koan that says, "Who is the one who hears?" It is not meant to be answered with the mind, but with presence. Theo began to ask himself this each time a voice rose. Who is hearing this? The frightened boy, the bitter man, the grieving son, the silent lover. Each time he returned to his breath, to the now. Eventually, the echoes faded, not because they were gone, but because they had been received. Theo did not leave the temple with enlightenment. He left with peace. He left knowing that his past would never vanish, but it no longer needed to scream to be acknowledged. He had listened, and in doing so, he had become whole. If you, too, carry echoes, if a name still startles you in a crowd, if a room feels fuller than it should be, if you hear memories like footsteps in an empty hallway, sit, listen, let them speak. They have waited not to haunt you, but to come home. As the Buddha said, nothing ever exists entirely alone. Everything is in relation to everything else. Your pain is not an intruder. It is part of the tapestry now. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what echo have I been avoiding? What voice in me longs to be heard? What would happen if I welcomed it with kindness? In our next story, we meet an old carpenter who builds a final bridge, not with wood, but with forgiveness across a river that once divided his family. Story 20. The bridge of forgiveness, the river, had long been quiet, but the silence was never peaceful. On its banks stood two wooden homes, faded and weathered, built decades ago by two brothers, Yen and Tao. Once inseparable, their laughter used to echo across the water as they fished and planted rice, shared mooncakes during Mid-Autumn festival, and stayed up all night telling stories under oil lamps. But that was before the quarrel. No one in the village remembered the details anymore. Some said it was over money. Others whispered about a woman. The truth had long since disappeared, buried beneath years of pride and pain. What everyone did know was this: for over 20 years, Yen and Tao had not spoken a word. They built fences. They stopped attending the same gatherings. When their children married, they sent envelopes but never showed their faces. The river remained between them, not by nature's design, but by human refusal. Then one day Tao died. He left behind a quiet widow, 2 sons, and a legacy of unspoken bitterness. Yen, now an old man with silver in his beard and calluses on his heart, did not attend the funeral. He stayed on his side of the river, pretending to be deaf to the drums. That night it rained, a slow, meditative rain, the kind that makes everything smell of earth and memory. Yen sat in his workshop, staring at a pile of wood. Once he had been the finest carpenter in the province. He built homes, temples, even coffins. But he had not built a bridge in years. Something stirred in him. He stood, took a breath, and picked up his tools. There is a Zen tale of 2 monks who came upon a woman at the edge of a muddy path. She was dressed in fine robes and unable to cross. One monk, without hesitation, lifted her and carried her to the other side. Hours later, as they walked in silence, the second monk burst out, "Why did you carry her? We are not supposed to touch women." The first monk replied, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Yen worked through the night. He sawed and carved, not with the strength of his arms, but with the ache in his soul. Every nail he hammered felt like a memory returning. Every board he laid down was a word he never said by morning. He had begun the frame. The villagers gathered, watching from afar. Whispers spread. Is he building a bridge? After all these years, he's too old, he'll never finish it. But he kept going. Each day he woke before the roosters. He didn't speak, he didn't explain. He built. Some days he cried, not loudly, but in small tremors that fell into the wood like dew. Other days he paused, staring at the empty space where the bridge would meet the other Shordao side. One afternoon, a child crossed the river in a small boat and brought him a cup of tea. "My mother says, it's time," she said softly. Yen nodded, but said nothing. In modern therapy, the act of repairing long-held relational wounds is known as reconciliation. Grief. It is the mourning not only of the person lost, but of the years, the conversations, the chances never taken. Unforgiveness becomes a shield. At first, it feels like strength, but over time, it becomes isolation. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the courage to rebuild. Yen did not wait for Tao to apologize. Tao was gone. Yen was not building a bridge. For his brother, he was building it for himself. The bridge took 38 days. It was not ornate. No carvings or lanterns, just smooth planks and quiet strength. When it was done, Yen stood at the center and looked out over the river. It shimmered, not with magic, with peace. He walked to the other side. He did not knock on the door. He simply stood beneath the plum tree. Eyes closed, Dao's widow opened the window. They looked at each other, and in that silent gaze, more was said than 20 years of letters could have conveyed. There is a quote from the Dhammapada in this world: hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without bitterness. It is choosing, again and again, to set down the weight. Yen began to visit the grandchildren he had never known. He taught Dao's youngest son how to hold a chisel. He made toys from leftover wood. He sat beneath the bridge on sunny afternoons and watched children run across it, unaware of the decades it had taken to lay each step. One day, a traveler came to the village. He saw the bridge and asked who had built it. A man who no longer needed it, said the old tea seller. The traveler was confused. Why build a bridge if you don't plan to cross? The tea seller smiled. Some bridges aren't for walking. They're for healing. In psychology, we often talk about closure, but true healing rarely comes with tidy endings. It comes with integration, with accepting that we may never get the words we wanted to hear, that some people leave before we say sorry, that some fences can never be undone, but bridges can still be built. Yen lived 5 more years when he died. His funeral was held on the bridge. Both sides of the river gathered. They wept, not for a man they had lost, but for the wisdom he had finally lived. If you are holding a grudge, if the river inside you has grown wide and silent, if your heart has become a house with locked doors, ask yourself, what bridge have I been too afraid to build? What might happen if I laid down the first board? Now, close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Picture the person you once loved and now resent, not their face today, but the moment when they first laughed with you. Let that image soften the edge. Let it be a beginning. In our next story, we follow a blind monk who finds clarity not with sight, but with silence, and teaches us that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things only need to be held. Story 21. The sound of the bellet was the hour before dawn when the bell first rang, a deep, resonant sound, neither loud nor faint, but clear enough to move through mist and bone. It came from the old temple on Wind Hill, a place most villagers had long forgotten. The monks had left years ago. The roof was mossed over, the courtyard swallowed by weeds, and the statue of the Buddha inside was chipped at the nose. But the bell was still perfect, made of bronze and silence. Nara was the first to hear it. She lived alone by the rice fields, an old woman with white hair and eyes always half closed, like someone halfway between sleep and something deeper. The sound startled her, but not in fear. She smiled. "He's arrived," she whispered. No one else heard it that day, or perhaps no one else was ready. The next morning, the bell rang again. This time, a child heard it. Little Min, no more than 6, tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mama, the mountain is singing." She hushed him, "Eat your soup." But his face stayed turned toward the hills, where the mist curled like monks in saffron robes. There is a Zen story of a student who asked his master, "How do I find peace?" The master said nothing. He picked up a wooden mallet and struck the temple bell. Bong. The student waited. The master said, "Did you hear that?" "Yes," the master asked. "Where did the sound go?" The student frowned. "It's gone," the master smiled. "Then so is your question." In the weeks that followed, the bell continued to ring each morning, always before sunrise. Always once. People began to notice. Farmers paused mid-harvest. Mothers stirred from restless dreams. Even the village drunkard, Jin, awoke with tears on his face and no memory why. Some blamed wind, others ghosts. A few said it was the monks returning, but Nara knew. She had seen him, a figure in grey robes, thin as candle smoke, walking barefoot up the mountain trail. He carried no belongings, only a bamboo staff and a soft smile that could weather the world. No one spoke to him, and he spoke to no one. But each dawn, he climbed the steps to the temple and rang the bell once, then vanished into the trees. What does a bell teach? It does not preach. It does not demand. It simply sounds. It invites you to listen to the air, to your breath, to the space between thought and thought. The bell is not the message. The silence afterward is. One day, Min followed the sound. He rose before the roosters and tiptoed from his home. Barefoot and blinking, he climbed the trail, his small hands brushing ferns wet with dew. Halfway up, he stopped. The monk stood there, waiting. Min froze. The monk said nothing. He only bowed. Min bowed back. Together, they walked to the temple. The monk let Min ring the bell. The boy's hands were small, the mallet heavy, but with help. The bell sang. It was not as loud this time, but it was just as deep. Afterward, they sat together. No words, just the boy, the monk, and the morning wind weaving through broken tiles. In modern psychology, we often speak of mindfulness as a technique. Focus on the breath, observe your thoughts, return to the present. But mindfulness is not a trick to feel better. It is a return to the raw, unfiltered now, to the moment before we judge, compare, or react. The bell is not a symbol of religion. It is an invitation to be as days passed, more. Villagers climbed the hill. A tired father, a grieving widow, a teacher who hadn't laughed in months. They didn't always speak. They simply stood as the bell rang and let something inside them unclench. One man brought a prayer. One woman brought her silence. A child brought a flower. The monk received all of it with a nod. He never asked them to stay, never asked them to leave. There is a story from the Pali Canon. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." And sometimes that word is not a word at all. Sometimes it is the sound of a bell in. Fogged up one day, the monk did not come. The bell did not ring. People waited. Some climbed the trail. The temple was empty, but in the center of the courtyard was a note. Ink on rice paper. It read, "The bell was never outside you. It rings each time. You remember you are here." For weeks after, the villagers rang the bell themselves. They took turns. The old, the young, the faithful, the doubting. Each ring was a kind of healing, each silence after a kind of rebirth. Eventually, the monk returned. No one asked where he had gone. They only bowed. He bowed back. And again the bell sang. What is the bell in your life? Is it a breath you forgot to take? A sunset you didn't watch? A child's question you brushed aside? The bell is not always bronze. Sometimes it is a moment that invites you to stop, to feel, to return, tonight. Before you sleep, imagine the bell. Feel its sound in your chest. Let it clear the dust from your day. Let it be a call back to yourself, and if you can, sit with the silence after. That is where the real teaching begins. In the next story, we journey with a woman whose life unravels when she loses everything but finds peace in a single bowl of rice, and the realization that simplicity is the final abundance. Story 22. A bowl of rice. There are some mornings when the world feels too loud, too sharp, too much. It was on one such morning that Suri packed her bag and left everything behind. She had been a banker once. Polished shoes, tight schedules, expensive coffee in plastic cups, and a constant stream of phone calls that never really said anything real. She had a husband who forgot how to look at her, and a home that was never quiet, even when it was silent. Then her father died. Then her husband left. Then the market crashed in the span of 6 months. Her world collapsed like a poorly balanced tower, so she left. She took nothing but a single bag, a notebook, and an envelope with some savings. She boarded a train without a destination, let the countryside blur into green waves and distant temples, and stepped off somewhere the map didn't mention. The village was small, almost hidden behind rice paddies and fog. There were no signs, no hotels, and no one who spoke much. But there was a small, crooked wooden house near the foot of a hill, with a garden of plum trees and a kitchen that smelled of boiled ginger. The woman who owned it was old, maybe 70, maybe more. She said nothing when she saw Suri, just pointed to a broom. Suri swept, and so she stayed. The first night was restless. Suri lay on a straw mat, listening to frogs and wind and her own breathing. The silence was so deep it was almost violent. She hadn't heard this kind of silence in years, not even in her apartment, where the fridge hum and elevator cables always whispered. Here, the world breathed differently. The next morning, the old woman handed her a bowl of rice, plain, no salt, no herbs, no garnish. Suri ate it. It tasted enough. She began to follow the rhythms of the place. Wake before the sun, fetch water from the well, boil tea leaves, sit in stillness as light crept into the room like a blessing. The old woman never offered instruction, but her every action was a kind of teaching. Sweep with your full attention. Eat with both hands on the bowl. Walk like the earth is listening. After a week, Suri asked her, "Why do you live alone?" The old woman poured tea, then replied, "Because I am not lonely." It was not spoken as wisdom, just fact. There is a Zen koan. A monk asked the master, "What is Zen?" The master replied, "A bowl of rice, a stick of bamboo." The monk asked. "That's all," the master said. "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The monk persisted. "But what about truth, enlightenment?" The master smiled. "You've already missed 3 meals trying to find it." One day, Suri's hands trembled as she washed the rice. Her thoughts were a storm. She thought of her old life, of deadlines, rent, the sharp click of heels on marble floors, the moments she felt like a ghost in her own skin. The old woman watched her. "You are not washing rice," she said. "I am." "No, you are remembering pain." Suri blinked. The woman took the bowl from her, gently. "Try again," she said, with both hands. Modern life teaches us to multitask. We eat while checking emails. We talk while scrolling. We breathe without feeling the breath. But in Zen, each act is whole. Washing rice is just washing rice. Breathing is just breathing. And in that simplicity, something cracks open inside us. That night, the rain came, not in gentle drops, but in thick sheets, slashing against the roof like knives. Suri woke with a gasp, heart racing. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, thunder rolled. She stood and stepped. Out onto the porch, the old woman was already there. Eyes closed, face turned toward the storm. Suri asked, "Aren't you afraid?" The woman opened her eyes. "No, the sky is just cleaning itself." Suri nodded, but her body still trembled. The woman said nothing more. She placed a second bowl beside her, and together they ate rice in the rain. What does it mean to be nourished? Not just fed, but filled. In Buddhist teaching, the first noble truth is dukkha suffering, unease, dissatisfaction. But the path forward is not always more answers. Sometimes it is fewer distractions, a bowl of rice, a place to sit, a breath remembered, weeks past. Suri wrote in her notebook every night short thoughts, feelings, sketches of the hills. She stopped craving her phone. She no longer needed to be needed. One morning, as she swept the courtyard, she saw a man watching from the edge of the path. He was thin, sunburnt, eyes hollow. The old woman appeared beside her. "Invite him," she said. They gave him tea, then rice. He ate in silence, then wept. "I lost everything," he said. The old woman said, "Then you are free." Suri watched the man leave at sunset. He did not thank them, but he left standing taller than he arrived. There is a parable. A monk approached the Buddha and said, "I am overwhelmed. My thoughts race. My grief is constant. What should I do?" The Buddha picked up a bowl, filled it with water, stirred it with his finger. "Look," he said. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's cloudy." The Buddha waited. Minutes passed. Then the water stilled. "Now," the monk whispered, "now I see my face." The Buddha said, "This is your mind. Let it settle." Sometimes Suri forgot she was ever someone else. She became part of the rhythms, the rice, the tea, the wind. Then one day the old woman grew still. She did not rise with the sun, did not prepare the morning rice. Suri found her sitting beneath the plum tree, eyes open. UNMOVING. She was gone, but not absent. Suri wept, then boiled the tea, then swept the floor, then rang a small bell she had never noticed before. Grief, too, is a bowl. It must be held with both hands. It must be tasted fully, and eventually it must be set down. Months later, a new traveler came to the house. Suri was already awake. She handed him a broom. He swept, she boiled the rice, and the rhythm continued. Life is not built from grand moments. It is stitched from the ordinary, the scent of ginger, the warmth of rice, the pause between thunder and breath. When we return to these, we return to ourselves tonight. Sit with a single bowl of something warm. Eat slowly with both hands. Let your mind settle like water in a still bowl. And if a memory comes, greet it gently. Then return to now, to this, to the taste of enough. In the next story, we travel with a man haunted by betrayal, who learns through a dying tree that forgiveness is not something we give to others, it is the root we grow for ourselves. Story 23. The dying tree in the highlands of the Eastern Valley, where mist rolled like slow breath across old mountains. There lived a man named Kenji who had not spoken a word to his brother in 17 years. They had once been like two roots, from the same tree twisting, growing, holding each other in every storm. But that was before the land dispute, before the betrayal, before the knife of silence was driven between them, and neither reached across to pull it out. Now, Kenji lived alone. His wife had passed years ago, and his son had moved to the city, chasing lights that never dimmed. Kenji remained in the old wooden house, nestled behind the pine groves, where the nights whispered and the days passed without footprints. Every morning, Kenji walked the same path behind his house to visit the tree. It was once a mighty oak, planted by his father when he was born. For decades, it stood tall, with branches like open arms, birds nesting in its limbs, shade falling over Kenji's boyhood swings and teenage secrets. But now it was dying. The bark cracked, the leaves had thinned, and a grey fungus had begun to climb its trunk like silent fire. Still, Kenji came every day. He would sit at its base, touch its roots, whisper words he no longer used on humans. "I'm here, I'm sorry, I remember." The tree never replied, but somehow it listened. One evening, a monk arrived at the edge of the property. He was young, with robes worn thin from miles, and a smile that did not press too hard. He asked for water. Kenji gave him tea. They sat without much talk, just the sound of the wind brushing the dry needles above. The monk said, "There's something in this place that aches." Kenji nodded. "The tree is dying." The monk tilted his head. "And what else?" Kenji didn't answer. In the days that followed, the monk stayed in the small guest room by the shed. He offered no teachings, no incense, no riddles, just help. Fixed the squeaking gate, repaired the leaking roof, watered the vegetables, and each morning he followed Kenji to the tree. He would sit a little distance away, watching, not intruding. On the 7th day, as the light softened across the hills, the monk spoke. "There's a practice in our monastery," he said, called embracing the wound. "We don't speak of forgiveness first. We speak of holding the pain as it is, not changing it, just seeing it fully." Kenji closed his eyes. "I don't think I can." "You already are," the monk said. That night, Kenji dreamt of his brother for the first time in years. They were children again, mud on their feet, running through the fields, laughing without edges. But then the dream changed. They were older. At their father's grave, one hand reached for the other, but neither moved. Kenji woke with tears on his pillow. There is a Zen story about a man who carried a heavy sack wherever he went. When asked what was inside, he said, "Grief, guilt, old memories." "Why don't you put it down?" Someone asked. "I've carried it so long," he replied. "I'm afraid I won't recognize myself without it." The next morning, Kenji didn't go to the tree. He walked instead to the old trail leading toward the village. The monk followed. Quietly, Kenji's brother lived 2 ridges over, past the ravine, in the house their father had once built with his own hands. Kenji hadn't seen it in years. His heart thudded with every step by the time they reached the fence. The sky had turned pale with cloud. Kenji froze. The monk said nothing. Then, from the doorway, a woman appeared. She was older now, thinner. His brother's wife. She recognized him instantly. "Kenji," she said softly. He nodded. "Is he home?" He asked. She hesitated. "He's not well, his heart. He doesn't walk far anymore." "I just want to see him," Kenji whispered. The room smelled of medicinal herbs and old wood. His brother lay on a low bed, breathing slow, eyes closed. Kenji stepped closer. Something ancient inside him cracked. He knelt beside the bed. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he reached out, trembling. I came, he said. I should have come sooner. His brother's eyes opened. There was no accusation in them, just a tired peace. I waited, his brother said. They said little after that. Words had never done enough, but they sat, hand over hand, to old men who had learned at last that the time we waste withholding love is never returned. When Kenji came back home, he walked to the dying tree. He sat, and for the first time in years, he wept without shame. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is remembering with mercy. It is not condoning, it is choosing peace over punishment. In Buddhist psychology, there is a truth. Anger held is a poison drunk by the holder, not the hated. Forgiveness is not something you give others, it is the cup you stop drinking from. Weeks passed, the tree continued its slow decline. But one morning, something strange happened. From the lowest branch, a green bud pushed through. Just one. Kenji stared at it for a long time. He did not smile, he simply bowed. Some things do not heal completely, but healing in Zen is not about fixing what's broken. It's about embracing what remains and offering it light. Tonight, if you carry something heavy in your chest, sit with it. Do not push it away. Do not name it bad. Breathe with it. Hold it like a child. And if, in time, you are ready, whisper, I see you, and I let you go. In the next story, we follow a young artist who loses his sight, but finds a deeper kind of vision through a blind Zen calligrapher who teaches him how to draw with his whole body, not just his eyes. Story 24. The blind brush when Hiroshi lost his sight. He thought he had also lost the sky. He was a painter, one of those rare ones who didn't just depict what the eye could see, but what the soul could not name. His canvases swirled with storms and serenity. Critics often said his blues breathed and his whites whispered. He used to smile at that. Art, he believed, was the echo of silence made visible. But then, one morning, he woke up and the world was gone. A sudden infection, a cruel, irreversible loss. He touched the window, but the light meant nothing now. The brushes stayed untouched, and slowly Hiroshi stopped speaking. Not out of bitterness, out of emptiness. Months passed. The apartment grew dusty. He stopped answering. Calls. Friends came and left awkwardly, eventually. Silence became the only guest who stayed. One evening, his younger sister, Akiko, visited. She brought soup. He didn't eat it. She sat beside him. He didn't speak. Finally, she left something on the tabula flyer. It was textured, so he could feel the raised print. Zen calligraphy for the blind. It read, a program at a remote temple in the northern mountains. He crumpled it, but didn't throw it away. That night, he dreamed of white paper floating in a dark river. When he woke, he could still feel its texture. The journey to the temple was long. He nearly turned back 3 times. When he arrived, there was no grand welcome, just the sound of sweeping birds and distant chanting. A young monk led him inside. The master will see you after morning zazen, he said. Hiroshi waited. He breathed in incense and cedar wood. It reminded him of childhood temples where he used to sketch monks under plum trees. Except now, he had no lines, no shapes, just memory. The Zen master was called Kaun, meaning cloud sound. He was old, maybe 70, maybe more, but his voice was young. You've come to paint, he said. I can't see, Hiroshi answered. Kaun smiled. Neither can I. Only then did Hiroshi notice the milky veil over the master's eyes. You're blind since I was a boy. and you do calligraphy. Kaun held up a scroll. Hiroshi touched it gently. The strokes were alive, textured, raised ink-like veins across rice paper. You don't need eyes, Kaun said, to feel the truth. The first lesson was breath. Not brush, not ink, just breath. Inhale until you disappear, Kaun said. Exhale until you return. They sat for hours. Hiroshi's knees ached. His back screamed. But the silence deepened, and within it something shifted. Not sight, but space. Then came movement. Kaun placed a long sheet of paper before him. Ink is not to be controlled, he said. It is to be danced with. He guided Hiroshi's hand, brush dipped. Paper touched, not for beauty, for being. You must become the stroke, Kaun whispered. Let the brush feel your grief. Let it weep with you. Hiroshi painted his first line. It was crooked, broken, and it trembled. So did he, but he did not. Stop. There is a Zen cone, a student asked. How can I paint the moon if I cannot see it? The master replied, first become the night. Each day, Hiroshi painted, not what he used to, not what others could see, but sensations, memories, the sound of his mother's laugh, rendered as a sweeping curve, the pain of his lost sight as a sharp descending streak, the stillness of the temple bell, a single dot in the center of space. The monks said nothing, but they kept his scrolls, and each morning more would appear in the hallway, hung like prayers. One day, a child visited the temple with his parents. He saw Hiroshi painting in silence. Later, he asked, why does the blind man draw? Kaun answered, because the heart still sees. After 3 seasons, Hiroshi stood in the garden. He tilted his face toward the sun. I can feel blue, he said to no one. I don't need to see it. There's a term in Buddhist psychology, chitta vritis, the ripples of the mind. Most of us paint with those ripples, but Zen calls us to still the water, to let the brush arise not from desire, or fear, or pride, but from presence. Hiroshi had learned this not in theory, but in ink, when he returned to the city. Hiroshi held an exhibit, not in a gallery, in a quiet room, at a school for the blind. The scrolls hung low, so they could be touched. Each had a title: Silence before Grief, Line of Letting Go, The Color of Trust. People wept without knowing why. Art is not what is seen. It is what awakens seeing within. Tonight, if you feel like something precious has been taken from you, know this. Within every loss is a new language, within every darkness, a new vision. Let your breath be your brush. Let your heart paint the page, and trust that what rises from your stillness will always be beautiful. In the next and final story, we meet a nameless monk who returns to the village of his childhood to sit at the grave of his enemy and discover the last lesson his master never spoke aloud. Story 25. The grave beneath the plum tree in early spring. The monk with no name returned to the village of his childhood. His robes were old, patched many times, dyed the color of ash and bark. He walked slowly, leaning slightly to one side, not from age, but from the weight of something he had carried for over 30 years. Not a bag, not a bowl, but a memory. The village had changed. The bamboo fences were replaced by concrete, the dirt paths paved. But the scent of soil after morning rain, of plum blossoms blooming to earlier, remained the same. Memory, after all, doesn't need the world to stay still. It just waits for the right breeze. He passed the old school, now a pharmacy. He passed the tea shop, now closed and crumbling. And finally, he stood at the gate of the cemetery. It was not large, just a humble hill with crooked stones and wild grass. Crows called overhead. Somewhere far off, a rooster crowed like it didn't know the day had already begun. He stepped inside. Barefoot, he knew exactly which grave he came to see. Kenta. The name rose in his chest like fire. Even now, after all the years of meditation, of vows, of silence, that name still stung like vinegar on a wound. Kenta had been his friend, his closest, his cruelest. They grew up playing under this very tree, the old plum by the cemetery wall. They had once carved their names into its trunk. But things rot, so do hearts. And one day, Kenta had betrayed him in a way no one else ever had. It had been over a girl, over lies, over pride. The details blurred, but the scar remained vivid. A fight, a night, a secret told, and a life shattered. He left the village the next morning without a goodbye. That was the day he began walking, and he never stopped. He sat down beside the grave. No, one had left flowers, only moss and dry leaves covered. The stone, he placed his palms together, closed his eyes, but no words came. How do you speak to someone who broke your heart and then died before saying sorry? The wind blew gently through the branches. A plum blossom fell onto his knee. He opened his eyes and let the silence say what? He could not. There is a Zen teaching. To hate someone is like holding a burning coal and expecting them to be burned. He had carried that coal for decades, but the man it was meant for had turned to dust long ago, so who had burned all these years? Only him. He remembered a cone his master once gave him. 2 monks crossed a river. One carried a woman across because she could not swim. Hours later, the other monk said, "You shouldn't have done that." The first monk replied, "I put her down at the river. Why are you still carrying her?" He had always thought the second monk was foolish, but now he saw he had been. Him carrying Kenta across 30 years of silence. Even after the river was long behind them, the monk reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small stone. It was smooth, from the stream beside the monastery where he once spent 10 winters in silence. He placed it on Kenta's grave. Then he whispered, "I forgive you." He didn't say it because he felt it. He said it because he was ready to become it. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a surrender. It is allowing the wound to be seen in full daylight and choosing not to feed it anymore. He sat there until the sun began to set, until his shadow joined the others beneath the trees, and finally, for the first time in his life, he cried, not for Kenta, but for all the years he had not lived fully, because of one memory in Buddhist psychology. There is the concept of samskarad, the mental imprints we carry from the past. Some are soft, some are etched like stone. But the practice of Zen is not to erase them. It is to bow to them, to offer them tea, and then to walk on. The monk rose, he bowed 3 times to the grave, and as he turned to leave, he did not look back. The plum blossoms fell like snow. The grave did not speak, but the silence no longer hurt. That night, back at the inn, he wrote in his journal, "There is no peace without release. And there is no release without returning to where the pain began, not to change it, but to meet it with eyes that no longer judge." As you end this journey with me, dear listener, may I invite you to pause. Is there a name that still burns in you? Is there a moment you carry like a stone in your chest? Perhaps tonight, you can place it on your own quiet grave, not to forget, but to forgive, as the Buddha said. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other to die. Now, close your eyes. Let your breath be the river, and let the past be the plum tree, beautiful, blooming, but no longer clinging to its blossoms. It's time to walk again, lighter, free, and wholly, truly, here. Before we part ways on this quiet path, I invite you to take a moment to reflect. If these stories have touched something within you, if they stirred an old memory, softened a tight place in your heart, or simply offered you a little stillness, in a noisy world, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share what resonated with you. What did you carry into these stories, and what might you be ready to put down? Your words may be the lantern someone else was waiting for. If you found peace or insight here, consider sharing this video with someone who might need it. A friend, a loved one, even a stranger. And if you'd like to continue walking with us through more stories of Zen, healing, and quiet wisdom, please subscribe to The Empty Boat and turn on the bell so we can meet again gently whenever you're ready. Until then, may your breath be steady, your heart be spacious, and your journey be kind. Thank you for being here. Stay light, stay true, stay empty and full. We'll meet again, in silence or in story.